Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 11, Knowledge is Power. Thank you, Dewey, you big beautiful bastard, for creating a system of locating books easily, I thought as I rifled through the card catalog to find anything on runes, pictographs, or ancient languages and whatnot. This library only had a small selection of books meeting my requirements, which didn't surprise me. It was a small town after all, of mostly farmers and blue-collar workers before the system arrived. I picked up one such book. Celtic Runes and Their Meanings. Looked promising. Another was called Norse Mythology and the last was called Understanding Ancient Egypt, which had some pictures of hieroglyphs and their meanings. I decided to sit in one of the comfortable reading chairs to the back of the library and started reading the first book. I was about 10 pages in when I heard a crunch come from the entrance. Fuck, I hissed quietly, turning off and packing away my flashlight and the books. I left my backpack next to the chair and moved behind one of the bookshelves, recasting my buffs silently that had expired while I was reading. It would have to do for now, I thought, looking at the reduced timers. There's no use hiding, we know you're in here. We just want to have a little chat, the mystery woman said in a flowery voice. I didn't buy it one bit. If they wanted to talk they could have announced themselves at the door or waited for me to exit. No, I had a feeling these were more gang members, maybe even more members from the Black Dragons I think they called themselves. Now, don't be shy, the voice called out, and I could hear her snapping her fingers, followed by 2 sets of feet moving to opposite sides of the room. They were going to surround me to try and flush me out. I knew they would find me sooner or later, so I decided to act of my own accord and stepped out from behind the bookshelf. My only other option being to sprint for the emergency exit that was towards one of the men. This caused the 2 that were going to opposite sides to stop and aim at me. Standing there with 2 other men behind her and slightly to the side was a stunning, if rather short woman wearing a leather biker jacket. She couldn't be more than 5 feet 3 inches with raven black hair and oh so kissable lips. The eyes though, they told a wholly different story, their gleaming malice evident even from here. It was obvious to see she had taken the time to sculpt her body when the system came online, making me wonder why anyone would waste the precious hour on something so trivial. Why yet, what do you want? I just wanted to be left alone to read, I said in a stuttering pattern to hopefully fool them into thinking I was afraid. Well, I mean I was afraid, just not that afraid, although, my hands shaking, unfortunately, that wasn't by design. Not now, nerves, I yelled internally. Ah, there you are. Well, you see, this is Black Dragon territory, normally we would just let you go for a fee. She winked at me and I shuddered, but, some of my men are missing, you wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, outsider? She asked sweetly. I saw her glance at my staff, then over to the rifle next to my bag, and knew I was hosed. I used the fleeting time before all hell broke loose to check her information. Charla Cotton, Chaos Mage level 17. I gulped at this. At first, I thought she might have been transported over like the Royal Guard, but she had the mannerisms and speech of a local. My next thought was, how many people has this woman killed to get to her level? Even if it was just her, I wasn't sure I could take her down. Then I saw her hands moving to form what I assumed was a spell, and I dove past the bookshelf I originally hid behind to the next one over just in time for it to explode, sending me tumbling past a 3rd bookshelf. I hit the ground hard, trying to scramble to my feet as I cast Rejuvenate. This was no time to be stingy with the healing. Getting up on shaky legs, I tried to sprint to the emergency exit, only to see it blocked by one of her flunkies. He aimed his rifle at me and pulled the trigger, but he had aimed for my chest and the bullet slammed into my armor, doing only 15 damage. I barely felt the bullet as my battle lust seemed to be washing over me in a torrent of euphoria. I jammed my staff into his chest as a return present with flurry active, and he fell back against the door, wheezing from the multiple impacts. I didn't have time to follow up as a silver dart of energy slammed into my side, sending me sprawling and knocking the wind out of me. I coughed out a bit of blood. A quick glance at my health showed it to be below half, and I popped one of the healing injectors. Good lord, even with my rock skin and shield that spell hit hard. I cast Earth Fist at the man who was down, trying to break his spine, but I missed and only managed to punch him in the kidney. It would have to do for now, as another bolt tore through the shelf I was behind, narrowly missing me. I see we have a magic user here, how quaint. Would you like to test your abilities versus mine? She said, laughing as she prepared another spell. I could tell I had the strength and speed on the others, and if this woman had placed most of her attributes in intelligence and wisdom, she may be a glass cannon. If I could just get close enough, I might be able to disable her and survive this encounter. I recast Rejuvenate as it came off cooldown. Expecting another spell to come flying my way, When it didn't come right away I worried. I risked a glance and noticed she was casting a long spell and I didn't like that, as that at least in video games usually equated to a more powerful spell. I cast Aura Strike again and rushed at the doorman, striking him across the face but not stopping as I could feel all the hairs on my body stand up as the air built with static discharge. "Oh fuck," I said, taking a second to glance at the woman and the ball of lightning she held. She just looked at me and smiled, releasing the electricity right at me. I managed to get most of my body behind the teller's desk but the bolt still clipped my leg, locking up my entire body and draining 90% of my health. I couldn't move a muscle as the electrical discharge wove through my body. Glad now that I picked up the ability to cast silently and I used all of my concentration to fight through the pain to cast Healing Touch on myself. Decided that living was preferable than worrying about someone possibly knowing I was a healer. The pain faded but my muscles were still locked in rigor. Then she walked around the desk. "Well, color me surprised, you survived my attack. Very few people do, you know, you should count yourself lucky. Or unlucky I guess. Either way, I will enjoy your death." She began to prepare another bolt and I realized something. I had been on the ground for over a minute, all my spells were off cooldown. I cast Rejuvenate again and then Healing Touch as soon as I could move and she snarled as the glow of my second spell went off. It was too late though. I jabbed a mana injector into my thigh and immediately cast Area of Denial. She was just within the edge of my dome and as it sprang into being it knocked her back and her spell fizzled. "WH. What is this nonsense?" she screamed, holding her bloody nose. I didn't reply, instead I ran at her, bumping her with the shield as I cast Flurry and Aura Strike. My staff met a barrier that glowed blue with the first 5 strikes, with the 6th I made it through to hit her in the sternum. I followed this up with an Earth Fist that seemed to fizzle out halfway to her with a loud pop. Bullets whizzed off my barrier but I kept my focus on her, rushing forward to disrupt her spell every time she tried to cast and smacking out with my staff. My aim was to at least cripple her arms if not kill her outright before my spell wore off. She tried to dodge backward but tripped on a piece of the broken shelf. When she flung her arm out to catch herself on the desk I smashed my staff down on her forearm with a resounding crack. She screamed and clutched at her broken appendage, but she wasn't out of the fight. She flipped her good arm up and a curtain of light appeared between us. I flinched back reflexively and she made a break for the door and her other men who were firing at me. I only had a few seconds left on my shield so I rushed towards my pack and bolted for the now vacant emergency exit door. I slammed the door shut behind me and who do I find leaned up against the side of the building? It was none other than my unwanted shadow. "A little help would have been appreciated," I said angrily as I ran past the spell sword. "I have my orders not to interfere with the natives, plus you're alive, that's more than the commander gave you odds for when he found out where you were heading. Even the guards steer clear of that crazy woman. Anyone who can make it to level 17 in one day is not someone you wish to tangle with if you want to live a long healthy life," Victor said, falling in step behind me. "I would ask you how you survived but everyone deserves their little secrets." We made our way quickly out of the Black Dragon's territory and back towards the barracks, Victor trailing me the whole way, and I silently prayed that Miss Chaos Mage's arm would never heal properly. There had been more books at the library that I wanted to check out but I thought it best if I rest up and leave tomorrow instead of tempting fate twice. I was done with this town and hoped to never see the Black Dragons ever again. It was time to return to my home and see if I could locate any of my friends and maybe my extended family that resided in that area. Not that I was all that close to any of them, but it would be nice to see a friendly face at least. When we returned to the barracks I talked with the commander and accepted his quest, letting him know I was leaving early in the morning. He provided me with 3 days of rations for my trip along with 1 healing potion. It was pretty much the same as the injector kind except you had to drink it, so not as convenient. I also found out who was coming with me, a soldier by the name of Fiona Clark. He didn't bother giving me the woman's level or class, but who cared, I could see that myself tomorrow. Right now I was a bit grumpy. None of the Black Dragons had died during our battle, which meant no experience for me and it left them free to terrorize more people. I sighed mentally and headed towards my room. Chapter 12, Travel Partner. I awoke early the next day, my dreams dominated by the faces of the 3 men I killed the day before, leaving me weary, having woken up from the nightmares multiple times. It was worse than the nightmares I suffered after my family's death. If those were any indication, they would haunt my dreams for years to come. I packed everything and was ready for my departure when I received another visitor. It was Fiona Clark, a rather unassuming looking woman with dirty blonde hair. She was wearing a metal cuirass with shoulder guards, but other than that her armor consisted of supple leather. I guess she was my travel companion and she didn't look happy. Great. Bring your weapon and meet me in the training yard, she said and left. Geez, she could have said hi or introduced herself or something, I thought in irritation. If it wasn't for my identify skill I wouldn't even have known who she was. Fiona Clark, sword dancer level 12. She was the lowest level person I had seen in the barracks so far. It was probably why she was assigned to this mission, being the least use in defense of the fort. I grabbed my staff and headed towards the training grounds. It was a square area about 50 feet across covered in hard-packed sand. I could see she was waiting for me, sword in hand, and she looked annoyed. I had a sinking feeling about this. So, what is this training? I said happily, trying to lighten the mood a bit as I stepped into the arena. A measure of your ability, she said flatly. Then she came at me like a blur. I tried to sidestep the thrust of her sword, only managing to trip on my own feet. Her blade following me like a guided missile, cutting a shallow slash across my arm before ducking below my awkward swing and spinning back out of range. I was way out of my class against her, I realized. What the hell? I yelled, examining the cut on my arm. She had returned to her position on the sand. Your reactions are slow and clumsy, your technique lacking. Who trained you? She said with a sour look on her face. My world didn't require martial skills beyond trained soldiers before the system came, why would I be trained? I said angrily back, blood flowing from my arm. She just TSKED, so you are relying on the basic proficiency that was given with your class, I assume. Yes, staff and mace. I choose it because I had no weapon at the time and was far from any place I could acquire one. At least you don't lack some wisdom, she said dismissively, come at me with all you have, do not worry about the damage, we have a healer, and this arena will prevent fatal blows. Well, that was good to know, although, she could have mentioned it before attacking me. I empowered my staff with aura strike and flurry and dashed towards her, casting earth fist. She sidestepped the earth attack and batted my strike off to the side. I tried to recover the blow, but every time I got close she just batted it away with the flat of her sword, all the while keeping on the move. I spun my staff trying to take out her feet, but she just hopped over my strike and jabbed her sword into my closest hand, causing me to nearly drop my staff. I backed away holding my wounded hand as it dripped blood on the ground. This woman was beginning to piss me off. Your movements are slow and highly telegraphed. Anyone with a modicum of training could see through them, and you would have been dead 3 times over if I had wished it. We are not leaving today or even tomorrow. You will train and I will instruct. I cannot have useless baggage on this trip. I retorted, I didn't ask you to come, but she just gave me a death glare that seemed to be an inherent trait for women everywhere, and we started training. We trained for hours and I bled in a dozen different places, all shallow cuts or stabs from her damnable sword. I hadn't managed to land a single blow on her yet. Then I got an idea. We circled each other and I kept well outside her reach as I started to spin my staff. When I had a good rhythm going, I used earth fist under my foot to propel myself at her like a missile. I could see her raise one eyebrow at my surprising attack strategy. I grinned in triumph, ready to finally land a blow. She met my staff with her sword, guiding it away from her with negligent ease and into the ground. I flipped over the now impaled staff, losing my grip, and she kicked out at me as I passed. "Humph," was all that came out as she knocked the wind from me with her heavily booted foot, and I tumbled to the ground in a heap. "An interesting tactic," she said, "it leaves you open to any number of counter moves though, since you have no control in the air. My suggestion would be to wait until the last moment and then use it to enhance your striking force instead. It may or may not work, and it could injure you as the spell may still cause you harm, so use it at your own risk. I think that is enough training for today. I will see you here at dawn tomorrow," she said with finality and walked out of the area. I just lay on the ground trying to catch my breath. I hurt all over and didn't feel any real improvement in my abilities. More a laundry list of stuff not to do, I guess that was some form of training. It felt more like she was punishing me for some unforeseen slight. After a while, I got up and headed off to my room. I would bathe and then eat. I also needed to talk to Frotsar about some things. After cleaning myself, I met up with the merchant and asked if he could join me for a meal. I already ate, but I have some free time to chat if you wish. I nodded and we went to the food hall. I wanted to call it a cafeteria for some odd reason. I'm glad I was able to run into you before I left. I have a few questions about the system. I was wondering if you could clarify for me. Certainly, Paul, what would you ask me? Well, one thing I noticed was the size of roaming groups, anywhere from 3 to 6, except the commander's group and that large war party. Is there a reason for this? That depends, there could be several reasons. If you are in a party, all experience is shared among the group, which can be good and bad depending on the situation. It's the most likely reason you see smaller groups running around town. If you lack any special skills to enhance group size, your group limit is 6 people. Now you can run into much larger groups that aren't in a party. This means only the one that does the killing blow will get the experience. For example, the commander has leadership abilities that allow him to group the entire barracks and set subgroups within. This is quite common among city defenders and the like. A war party is slightly different. War leaders utilize another skill that allows the leader to command a large group. Everyone under the war leader gets reduced experience and the war leader receive a larger share. The reason armies or war parties do this is so they can track the flow of battle and easily command troops by giving them instructions directly through their system display. Makes sense in a way. Another question? Certainly, go ahead and ask. Why is it that nobody here is using advanced weapons or armor? That is an oddity of the world I came from. Most advanced technologies didn't seem to work well on our planet. That and the fact that most guns like your rifle or pistol do little damage in the grand scheme of things means people were better off utilizing primitive tech and armor for the stat bonuses. There are certain mana-fueled technologies that did work and were starting to appear on the market, but they are prohibitively expensive for most people. My mana pistol is one example, but you would need to supply these types of items with the mana unless you have a mana battery or generator to power it. Your world is different. It seems from everything I have seen that technology and magic will coexist just fine here. Have you noticed any working tech? He asked questioningly. I shrugged and pulled out the wind-up flashlight from my small bag that I carried with me now. I have this, I said, winding up the device and turning it on. He marveled at the item and asked if he could inspect it. He turned it over in his hands, inspecting every piece of the item before handing it back. A fascinating little device. Do you know how it functions? I have a general idea, I said. From what I understand, spinning this piece will generate an electrical field that powers a capacitor. I haven't seen any other working technology other than guns, of course, but those are only mechanical in nature. I wonder if a mana-fueled version of your device could be created. I will have to ponder that and see if I can cobble something together. I enjoy a bit of tinkering now and then, he said with a smile. Now, any further questions for me today? I thought about it for a bit and came up with one more question that maybe he would have some insight on. These gangs, I said thoughtfully. Yes, what about them? It seems odd to me that on the very first day groups like this would coalesce and hit levels well above my own. It is odd, the merchant said, unless they had prior knowledge of the system. Perhaps someone attempted a power play to control your planet but failed and the system activated early. It would explain a few oddities I have noted. I didn't like the thought of some globally reaching power trying to control the entire populace through the system, but it made a strange sort of sense. I had nothing against governments controlling the populace to some extent, but if Frotsar was right, this seemed more like someone wanting ultimate control over everyone's lives, and I wasn't about to be someone's slave. I would have to do some more digging. Maybe a larger town could provide some more information. I thanked the merchant for his time and headed off to bed. The next 2 days were a rinse and repeat of me getting my ass handed to me by Fiona, who only seemed to get more violent with me each day. In those 2 days, I had only managed to score a glancing blow on her that resulted in an extra helping of hoop ass from her. I lay in my bed too sore to do anything other than remain still. It did allow me time to think about the trip south. We would be leaving tomorrow and I was tempted to just leave the prickly woman behind and tell the commander he could go screw himself. But I knew an extra fighter on this trip couldn't hurt. Originally my destination was 90 miles or so, but if we ran into more rending on the way, who knows how long it would take. So far the roads were intact, but even that could change. There were just too many unknowns. I sighed and closed my eyes to try and get some sleep. We set out early the next day with no fanfare. Not that I expected much, but seriously nobody even cared to wish us off. Oh well. Fiona was as grumpy as ever and refused to even speak to me. The typical silent treatment, I thought, but I had no idea what I even did to draw her ire, so I left the woman to stew in her feelings. When I tried asking, she just glared daggers at me and I decided to keep to myself after that. It didn't take us long to leave the town behind, as the barracks were situated closer to the southern end of the town. We encountered only one weak group of Sulid that Fiona and I dispatched before they even knew we were there. After that, we walked unmolested for hours. I started to notice more and more abandoned cars on the road. A few were burned out and blood, lots of blood. Fiona had been quiet and weird, occasionally looking back as we walked. I tried asking her about it but she acted like it never happened and glared at me. Fine, if she wanted to play the petulant child, so be it. I stopped to examine the blood in one of the unburnt cars. The blood was mostly dry and I only gave a cursory examination to the drying stains. The car was my real goal. I was examining an old wood panel wagon probably from the late 70s early 80s if I had to guess. Likely carbureted and should still run, but it was stopped like the rest of the cars. This made me curious to know why and might explain why I had not seen any working vehicles at all. Why do you waste your time examining that horseless carriage when we need to hurry south? I was surprised to hear Fiona speak after so long in silence and blinked in surprise. Curiosity mostly, and to answer a question I have had since day one. It won't take long, I added, seeing her sour demeanor. I got back to the car and ignored the surly woman for a few minutes. The hood popped open and I pulled it up. Everything looked intact and it should start. I turned the key but no power. I found some loose wire and connected it to either battery terminal, then touched them together. Not so much as a spark. Well, that answers my question. Good, now we can quit wasting time and keep moving. I rounded on the woman. What is your problem? She just ignored my question and started back down the road. The woman appeared to be a bit jumpy, like she had never left the safety of a town before. I thought this was why her behavior was so odd. Not for the first time I wished the commander had sent someone else with me. We walked for another hour before the land changed for the extreme. Terrain that should have been mostly flat farmland with small groups of trees dotting the landscape turned into sharp rock outcroppings and deep gorges that looked like a scar across the landscape. So that's what I decided to call it on my hand-drawn map, the scar. You have earned 500 XP for naming an unknown landmark. Oh, experience for discovering and naming a new location. My inner explorer shouted in joy at this news. The edges of the scar weren't visible from this vantage point, too many trees. It reminded me a lot of the Grand Canyon, only not as deep or wide, and the tops of the rock pillars contained the remains of the road and even part of a house that I spotted far off. Also, unlike the Grand Canyon, it was filled with trees and shrubbery along the sides and bottom. Let's stop here and rest for a bit, I suggested, knowing it would be either a long trip down or around, and this was as good a place as any to spend the night. No, we will continue on into the night so I can be done with this assignment. Then be my guest, I'm stopping here. I am not entering those foothills surrounding the scar in the dark. Scar? What nonsense, you will continue, I commanded. Command all you want, lady, I don't report to you, I said angrily, getting ready to sit down before I heard her sword leave its sheath. What are you doing? I said, eyeing her warily. I know what you are up to, and I will not fall victim to your ploy. What was this woman on about? What ploy? I think you're confused about something. How about you put away the sword and let's talk this out? Silence, foul trickster, I have heard enough of your lies and stalling tactics. I can hear your friends approaching even now. Friends? What is she on about? My confusion at her words showing on my face. This didn't hold her blade though. She came at me in a blur and I twisted to the side, managing to knock her sword away at the last moment, but I knew I couldn't beat her. All my boosts were active as I had just refreshed them, but she also had these same advantages as we were grouped up at the time of casting. She left the group right as she attacked me, leaving me low on mana. She chose the perfect moment to strike so that I would be at a disadvantage, and I was. My mana was below 200 and I couldn't cast the only spell that may even the odds in this fight. She slashed me across the bicep as I reeled back, trying to get outside her reach, but she kept pushing me and I couldn't block or use my abilities fast enough as I backpedaled and slid to the side to avoid her strikes. The kick came out of nowhere and I felt myself flying through open air. That's when I realized my mistake. She had lured me into a position to kick me off the cliff. I flew through the air for a few seconds before I tumbled down the incline, losing my staff and taking multiple hits from trees and rocks as I bounced down the rocky hill. My health fell precipitously, but I managed to cast Rejuvenate as I fell, hoping it would be enough to save me as I slammed into the ground. They say it's not the fall that kills you but the sudden stop at the end. They can fuck right off. I hit the bottom with a meaty thud, 12 health remaining, both legs broken and at least one of my arms as well. The other was pinned between some rocks that had tumbled loose from my fall. I just lay there in pain, gasping to try and recover my breath that had been knocked out as I slammed against the ground, my head too fuzzy to cast any more healing. I was bleeding and the only thing keeping me alive was my slowly dwindling Rejuvenate spell. Chapter 13, Betrayed. I slowly opened my eyes, realizing I must have passed out from the pain. My head still pounded and I still couldn't move. I glanced at my health and saw it had gone up to 23 in the time I had been unconscious. I didn't want to do the math, but I had to figure out how long I had been lying here, assuming my health had not dropped below the 12 I had before I lost consciousness. I figured I was out less than an hour. My head was now clear enough now to cast Rejuvenate, and I was certainly glad for the ability to cast silently, as even those small movements caused me pain. I couldn't imagine the pain a word of power would cause as it affected my entire body. I tried casting Cleanse as well to see if it would clear my head some more, but there was no noticeable effect. I repeated casting Rejuvenate when it came off cooldown until my arm snapped back into place. Now that my free arm was healed, I could cast Healing Touch. This was the one downside of the spell. It could be cast on anyone within 25 m except the caster. For that, I needed palm contact with myself to cast it. It was an odd peculiarity of the spell. I felt my legs repair themselves next as my health ticked up. With that done, I looked around to find my backpack, or what was left of it. It was torn open from the fall and all of my supplies had been scattered along the hillside. I just lay there for a minute and decided to go over any notifications while I took stock of the situation. Congratulations, you have earned the title Indomitable. Weak men break in the face of adversity. You just laughed. 25% improved chance to stop deadly blood loss. I could do without the flavor text, but at least my near-death experience had gifted me something in return. I turned over to try and free my trapped arm. It took a few minutes, but I managed to pull it free from the rubble. While doing this, I wondered why Fiona had not come down here and finished me off. She had mentioned that she heard people coming? At the time I thought she had just used it as an excuse to attack me, but what if it wasn't? Who could have been trailing us? Someone from the town perhaps, but I didn't know anyone other than Frotzar and the few royal guard. Oh, no. If she thought it was someone from the Black Dragons, then her strange behavior towards me started to make sense. At least since we began our trip, I was starting to suspect the commander may have said something about me as well to sour her mood towards me. She must have thought I was stalling deliberately to allow them to catch up and capture or kill her. No wonder she attacked me. Still, she should have said something sooner. We could have fought them together or fled. I'm not sure I would have acted much differently in her place. With someone you barely know, and as soon as you leave safety you realize people are following you. I would like to think I would try and communicate better, but I could see her side as well. While I was alone, she had an entire garrison of people to think about, and if her mission failed nobody would know for weeks. Long after it was too late to do anything about their situation. While her actions started to make some sense, it didn't make me any happier about my current situation. Or the fact that I still had a quest to fulfill to earn that money, held in trust by the weird rules of the system Frotzar assured me. I looked up to the top of the cliff. It was a good 100 feet at least to the top. Cursing that woman under my breath, I started collecting my items, or what was left of them, and putting them into a pile to sort through. It took me almost half an hour to find my staff wedged into a tree a quarter of the way up, and retrieve it from the hillside. It was good to be armed again. Finishing the mission would be damn near impossible now unless the woman managed to flee our pursuers. If they captured her, who knew where they would go? The fact that the mission was still active told me she was likely still alive. It seemed like the likely place would be to move farther south. I don't think the Black Dragons had a large force in the town, otherwise, I would have expected them to surround the library, instead of fleeing. I could try and beat them to the other side of the scar. I saw the land around the top and it looked rough to travel across. I'm not quite sure what I would do if I caught up with them though. Especially if that Charla woman was there. I could always turn around and report to the commander what happened. Somehow I doubt I would leave that conversation alive. How had they even managed to find or track us? Had they been waiting specifically for me or someone from the Royal Guard? Had someone sold us out? It seemed the most likely option, since they would have had to wait days for us to appear otherwise. It might also have the added benefit of ridding the town of the only truly powerful people, leaving it free for the guard to steamroll the rest of the populace. I wanted to think better of them, but I hardly knew them. While pondering the conundrum, I went over my recovered gear. The backpack was a mess with a torn strap and a large hole in the side. I was able to roughly patch it with some torn cloth and a sharp stick that I used as a really rough needle, and some thread I made from one of my spare socks. My wind-up flashlight was a loss. The charging handle was busted off the side and the bulb had been smashed against a sharp rock. I decided to keep it anyway in case I found replacement parts. My tent and tent poles were shredded and broken, so I tossed them off to the side. Thankfully my sleeping bag had survived intact, and I was glad for that. My food and water had been mostly lost, though I managed to recover one intact water bottle and 3 of my meal bars, if only smashed a little. I sighed and berated myself for being such a fool. I should have immediately turned the commander down when I found out how much Fiona disliked me during training or requested someone else accompany me. Someone perhaps a bit more level-headed. Whatever happened, I needed to level before I caught up with her or whoever had her. My guess being they would skirt around the landmark. Going around could take a few hours or days depending on the landscape, but my estimate was on the later, as I could not see the end of the scar, as I affectionately called it, and that meant it was at least 10 miles across. Now she could run the entire way, and I knew she had the endurance for it, but with the unfamiliar terrain, I doubt even she would risk it, and if she was captured I doubt the group would risk that pace if they had any sense. I made my choice. I would go through the scar and as straight across as possible to try and outpace her or them. I hitched up my repaired backpack and got ready to set off. Then Lady Luck slapped me across the face and said, "Not on my watch," as the strap broke again, dumping all of my items back on the ground. "Whyy?" I yelled in frustration. After doubling up on the repair and testing the strap, I finally managed to head off through the winding ravines and hills. I had a few hours until dark and wanted to find a good place to hold up for the night. After a few minutes, I started hearing rustling in the brush around me. At first, my mind went to Fiona having found me, but I quickly rejected that idea. I set my bag down and prepared my staff. Out of the thick undergrowth came a large boar. It noticed me and grunted a challenge as it pawed the ground. "Tusked boar level 5. F you piglet, I've had a bad day," I said in response, and the beast charged. I waited until he got up a good head of steam and cast Earth Fist right in his path. The beast slammed headfirst into the spike of earth and made a terrible squealing sound. I no longer had a gun since my pistol ran out of ammo, and I was forced to leave the rifle behind at the library, so I just bashed the beast over the head repeatedly until it went quiet, which took longer than I expected on such a low-level creature. My experience ticked up again, but I still didn't level. I needed to find a better place to farm. I walked on, leaving the dead beast behind. I had no hatchet anymore, that was lost in the fall, and my pocket knife wasn't going to be sharp enough to skin the animal. I did loot it and received 2 boar tusks. After another 30 minutes of walking, I saw what I thought was a cave at the end of a cul-de-sac between opposing cliffs. I thought it was worth checking out, so I headed in that direction. "Bugs you, why did it have to be bugs?" I grumbled, looking at the cave from a good distance away, watching the large centipede-like creatures crawl around the mouth of the cave. They had to be at least 5 feet long with 6-inch-long mandibles that looked strong enough to tear a limb off. "I just need to clear them out so I can rest for the night," I told myself. Should be easy to kill a few bugs even if they were big bugs. I made my way down to get in range of my identify spell. Rock Centipede level 5. I prepared my spells and started to approach them. It didn't take long for them to notice me and start clacking their mandibles together angrily at me. This was going to suck. They all came at me at once, and I decided to split them up by hitting the middle one in the side with an earth fist, knocking him into the one beside him. This bought me a few seconds as they untangled themselves. I slapped the first one to reach me aside with my staff with a jab. I backpedaled as the other 2 closed in, spinning my staff and slapping away mandibles. I wasn't entirely successful and took a couple of slashes to my legs and thighs as they tried to bite at me, the cuts being shallow. I cast Rejuvenate and ducked under one as it tried to jump at me. Turns out their legs are just as sharp as their jaws, and it sliced my back up rather well as it passed over, unable to gain purchase. I spun in a circle, clearing the creatures from my vicinity, and dashed back down the trail as they gave chase. My back on fire from the numerous small gashes. I used Healing Touch and jabbed out at the closet one, activating flurry of blows. Each strike cracked its hard exoskeleton and it went down unmoving. I dodged another incoming bite and kicked the offender in the head, stomping it into the ground where orange ichor oozed out. 2 down, 3 to go. One of the remaining 3 reared back and spit a grey blob at me that stuck to my shirt. It wasn't causing me any damage, but I could feel the fabric bunch up as it touched the glob. I smacked the next centipede to rise in the side, causing it to miss its aim, and hit the third one, who was now having trouble dislodging its legs from the gooey mess. Dashing in, I picked up the one I hit with my staff, flinging it back and away with an upward swing. I ducked under another glob of spit and smashed that one over the head. My 2 days of torturous training with Fiona paying off. She had been much faster than these creatures. It crashed to the ground, kicking and tearing as it tried to recover its faculties. I didn't give it the time and smashed down on its head again until it stopped moving. I felt a wet slap against my back as the stuck centipede managed to free its legs and spit at me. Damn it, forgot to keep the enemy in sight. I dashed back at the monster, hitting him with some rapid jabs. I would have used flurry, but it was still on cooldown. It went down after a few strikes, only leaving the one I tossed away left. I went to turn and my back brushed against a bush, tangling me up as the substance coating my back stuck to that as well. I could see the last monster scuttling towards me, then it stopped just out of range and started spitting at me. I managed to dodge most of the spit, but it hit me twice in the leg and I could feel my foot sticking to the ground. My cooldown time for Earth Fist finally reset and I smashed the creature into the side of the hill with the spell, killing it. You have reached level 7, modifiers increased by 1, 3 free skill slots available. You have 3 open skill slots. To see available skills at your level, please enter the skill chart. I decided to wait on the skills as I tried to get free of the substance the rock centipede spit on me. Luckily the stuff seemed to harden after some time and flake off. Although it left my hoodie and pants looking like some male teenagers used. You know what, not even going to continue on that line of thought. I just pulled the hoodie off to get as much of the dried spit off as possible. Ew, I said, peeling the last of the hardened spit off. I can imagine getting surrounded by these bugs only to get covered in this stuff and for it to harden, leaving me motionless. I shuddered at the thought, putting the hoodie back on as it was still chilly at night during this time of year. I decided to loot the bodies first, getting 15 chitin plates and 10 mandibles for my efforts. I wasn't sure why sometimes the system seemed to give out more of an animal's parts than others when looting. It would have to be another question for later, I thought, tossing the items in my bag. I looked at the cave, deciding not to go in until I selected my 2 skills. I kind of wanted to save the free one I earned until I made it to the bazaar to see what I could purchase. I opened up my skills page to see what was available to me. Seismic Strike causes a rippling wave of earth to deal weapon damage to everything within 20m from the point of impact and causing those affected to stumble. Cost 100 mana, cooldown 3 minutes. Healing Aura. Your body emits a healing aura that affects all your party members within 20m. Heal 150 HP over 30 SEC, excludes caster in effect, cost 75 mana, cooldown 1 minute. Imbue. Imbue your weapon with elemental damage for 60m. Must choose damage type when activating the skill, cannot be changed while active, cost 50 mana, cooldown 60 minutes. Stunning Gust. Your attack produced a gust of wind that causes weapon damage and has a chance to stun the target. 15m range, cost 25 mana, cooldown 15 SEC. Now all of these were good skills and I could see a definite earth and wind theme going with my class. I would only choose 2 of them though, saving the extra skill slot to see if a more interesting skill came along. Seismic Strike seemed like a no-brainer. Having an area of effect combat ability would come in handy. Casting cost was steep, but I would have to juggle that with my other abilities anyway. Healing Aura made sense if I was in a group or party, at least if I could trust them enough to use it. Best to skip that for now. Imbue seemed nice, but it didn't say if it added damage or converted your weapon over to that damage type. I was leaning on the latter, which could be good or bad depending on the situation. Adding fire element and then running into fire-based creatures would leave me without a way to damage them until I could change the spell out. Waiting to cast it until combat would be ideal, but then I'm stuck with it for the full 60 minutes. I might pick it up later. Last was Stunning Gust. It wasn't the most impressive of skills, but it filled out what I lacked, which was a ranged attack option other than my Earth Fist. It was also cheap to cast and recharged quickly enough that I would likely get multiple uses of it during a fight. I made my choice. Seismic Strike and Stunning Gust were added to my ability list. I decided to look at my stats since I hadn't in some time. Frotzar had been nice enough to show me how to display my modifiers as well. Damn hidden features. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter level 7. Strength, 11, plus 2, modifier x8. Endurance, 16 modifier x26. Agility, 13, plus 2, modifier x8. Perception, 12 modifier x8. Intelligence, 16 modifier x26. Wisdom, 14 modifier x8. Charisma, 11 modifier x8. Luck, 12 modifier x8. HP, 416, 457. Mana, 416. Mana Rigon, M112. Skills. Lesser Rejuvenate. Minor Wind Walk. Minor Giant Strength. Shield. Area of Denial. Healing Touch. Earth Fist. Aura Strike. Endure. Rock Skin. Cleanse. Flurry of Blows. Seismic Strike. Stunning Gust. Ew, it showed my last name. Anyway, Frotzar had told me what the modifiers are used for. Seemed like the modifiers started at a base 20 or a base 2 and went up 1 every level. Strength was used to determine additional damage on a critical hit, not just hitting something in a critical spot but an actual critical strike determined by my luck and other abilities. That meant I could do an additional 104 damage including my weapon damage and critical bonus damage to the target. This explains why sometimes my strikes seemed to one-hit creatures. Not much can stand up to a strike that was nearly 200 damage, at least at my level. The strength modifier also determined my carrying capacity. A base strength of 11 was not that great and I wasn't including my skill boost in my math because I couldn't keep it active all the time yet, which meant I could carry 88 pounds before I would suffer penalties. Of course, intelligence went towards my mana and spell effectiveness. Wisdom would improve my mana regeneration rate. I may have added a few too many points in wisdom this early as my mana regeneration per minute was now up to 112. Oh well, I can never have too much mana, not with my power-hungry skills. Agility was a bit more nebulous. Frotzar said it had some effect on acrobatics and base movement speed as well as coordination to some extent. The product of the two numbers came to 104, did that mean my base movement speed was 104 what? Or 104% and what was considered normal? I certainly didn't feel twice as fast as I did before the system. So perhaps base 100% would be normal. I felt slightly faster and more agile than I did pre-system. It made sense if I was 4% faster than normal, which felt about right. Perception dealt with my ability to see long distances and spot stuff that was out of the ordinary. I could now focus and pick out details at a much longer range than before the system. It is an ability more useful for ranged attackers and perhaps thief types though. Charisma helps people like you or helps you gain others' trust more easily. There is no formula set in stone as there are many underlying threads or interconnected links that could skew the calculation one way or another. Endurance dealt with hit points and how long you could fight or run for without exhausting yourself. Then there was luck. Frotzar speculated that it had to do with drop rate and chance to hit a critical strike or even avoid one. Now that I had applied 2 of my free skill points and checked my stats, I was ready to head into the cave. Chapter 14, The Horde. As I crossed the threshold of the cave I got a new message. You have entered the Kaidan Horde, level 5 dungeon. Recommended team size 4 people of level 6 or higher. Well, I did want to level up, might be just the place I needed. I sighed and gripped my staff, maximum effort. I smashed the last centipede of this group into the ground and took a breather. This was the third wave I fought off so far and I had nearly died in the first wave when I tried to use my new seismic strike, not realizing it was a 2-part spell. The second wave hit me before the spell cooldown refreshed and I chose to go without the skill for the third wave, instead deciding to utilize Stunning Gust. I backed out to the cave entrance to buy myself more time before the next wave hit so I could look over the skill description in detail. I would have to remember to acclimate the spell knowledge I learned in the future instead of just assuming all of my spells acted the same. Seismic Strike causes a rippling wave of earth to deal weapon damage to everything within 20m from the point of impact and causing those affected to stumble, cost 100 mana, cool down 3m. It took a bit of digging but I found the issue I was having. Point of impact spells requires a somatic component in the form of origination loci. Can be accomplished with a part of the body or weapon. The system could be so vague sometimes. How was I supposed to know that point of impact meant that was a second step? Casting the spell as it was intended to be cast, I could hear and feel a thrumming hum coming from my throat and I activated the next step by slamming the end of my staff into the ground. The power of the spell rippled out from that point and into the ground, shaking the floor, walls, and ceiling, causing some loose rocks to fall but no serious structural damage to the dungeon, which was reassuring. The spell also caused some screeches from down the tunnel as the next wave was hit by the edge of the spell's effect. I smiled, time to get to work. I waded through the next group of 5 centipedes which seemed to be immune to the stumble effects of my spell, not surprising with that many legs. I spun my staff in a horizontal slash, letting out a stunning gust at the closest bug. It went down but wasn't dead. I continued the spin of my staff around my back, slapping the next one back as it tried to spit at me. I jabbed my staff in its face, crushing it against the wall, and jumped back as 3 spit globs came at me. I managed to dodge 2 as the third hit me in the arm. I hit one of the centipedes with an earth fist, ending its life, and jumped towards the last 2 with flurry active. I wanted to see if I could hit both with one attack. I wasn't quite effective as I managed to strike the first one 3 times. Then I missed 2 strikes as I adjusted my aim towards the second bug, only managing to hit it once as the spell faded away. The first one died from the damage but the second one lunged at me, trying to rip my throat out with its sharp mandibles. I attempted to lean back and only managed to fall over as the bug sunk its mandibles in my raised arm. Ah! I screamed as the creature tried to rip my arm off. I managed to roll over on top of the bug, using my body weight to push down on my staff hard enough to crush its head against the floor. After it died, I pried its jaws off my arm with shaking fingers, rolling off to the side while casting Rejuvenate as the last centipede lunged at me from behind. This time I remembered to keep track of all my targets. Rolling out of the way hurt my already injured arm, but I grit my teeth. "I didn't forget about you, my creepy crawly friend," I said, getting to my feet and keeping my wounded arm low to my side. I weakly jabbed out with my staff using my good arm, and the creature dodged to the side. I cast Aura Strike and rushed in with some more jabs and thrusts. I had noticed these creatures weren't very good at backing up. Eventually, I got the strike I needed and the creature fell over dead. I looked at the mess that was my right arm. Already the wound was healing. I had lucked out with the sticky spit as well. There was so much dust and debris on the ground that the spit I was covered in had failed to stick to the floor. That would have been bad. My arm slowly regenerated and I used cleanse to make sure I didn't get any nasty disease from the bite wound. As long as I kept track of these bugs, they weren't all that hard to fight, my staff easily able to crush the hard carapace. They were relatively slow as well, which is probably why they had the restrictive spit. I just needed to avoid being hit by their mandibles, feet, and the spit. My mana and health ticked up as I waited for the next wave of bugs. It seemed to be taking longer for each successive wave to come at me. Probably because they had longer to travel, that was fine with me. It gave me time to recover my health and mana and let my cooldowns end. This was too slow. I needed to try and draw as many waves to me as I could. Luckily the cave had some bioluminescent moss along the walls, allowing me to see somewhat as I sprinted down the tunnel, ducking and dodging past the scuttling bugs that seemed to be surprised by my actions. This didn't prevent me from being hit a few times by spit or attacks, and I used Rejuvenate to keep my health topped up. I did this until I had a train of 20 of the rock centipedes following me. When I saw the next group, and before they spotted me, I doubled back, casting Area of Denial and Seismic Strike. Then I turned into a whirlwind of spins, jabs and thrusts, using all of my abilities to kill off the monsters before my spell ran out. I managed to get 18 of them before the spell ended, and I finished the last 2 off without taking any serious wounds. The area around me was covered in spit and orange ichor in a perfect circle from where it slid down the field's surface. I carefully stepped over the bodies, making sure to avoid any of the still sticky spit. I was exhausted. Who knew fighting was so taxing? Even with my high endurance, it took a lot out of me. I made sure to loot every corpse, but like the ones before, they only seemed to drop chitin plates and mandibles. My pack was full of them now, and I had to leave the rest behind. I really needed a dimensional storage item. It was getting tiring losing out on all this extra loot. Sighing, I jogged back up the tunnel. I was gaining experience quite fast in this cave, but my big ability was on cooldown and I needed a break. Leaving wouldn't be a problem, as it took 12 hours for dungeons to reset after you left, according to Frotsar. I may have to deal with more than one group of the beasties when I returned, but it shouldn't be a big deal, now that I had a bit of a rhythm. I exited the cave and looked around for firewood. I had an idea I wanted to test. It didn't take me long to gather a few armfuls and toss them next to the cave entrance. I even dragged some larger logs over. I wasn't going to smoke them out, that would just be ridiculous. Even if I did know how large the cave system was, I was more likely to be swarmed by the bugs before the smoke did any noticeable damage. This wall of wood was mostly to keep the multi-legged horrors away from me for a few hours while I ate and rested. After a few more trips, I figured I had enough materials and entered the dungeon again. I had to fight off 10 of the beasts at a time as soon as I got back in, and that was a close one. The only thing that saved me was one of the health injectors I had gotten from Frotsar. That man was a godsend. Other than the battle being a bit more hectic, it was becoming easier as I was starting to get into a groove and getting better at dodging the damn spit. After I killed off the bugs in the first room, I started hauling in the logs and kindling. I piled up the logs and remains of centipedes in the tightest portion of the cave tunnel. It wasn't perfect, but it would work for my needs. I used some other kindling to start a small fire near the entrance, keeping my eye on the barrier I constructed. The sounds of chittering were coming from the other side, and every 3 minutes I would cast Seismic Strike and an Earth Fist beyond the wall. The squeals of anger were enough to let me know I had scored a hit. I then walked over to make sure the barrier was still intact. I repeated this for the next 3 hours, taking the time between attacks to eat. I only once had to fight off a wave of 3 that managed to get through the wall before I could resecure it. I even managed to hit level 8 during those 3 hours. While I wasn't offered any new skills, I did get upgrades to some existing ones. Rejuvenate, heals 9-5 HP over 30 SEC 25 M range, cost 25 mana, cooldown 30 SEC. Minor Giant Strength Plus, increase strength by 2 for 10 minutes, cost 30 mana, cooldown 6 minutes. Improved Earth Fist, deals earth damage int X.34 modifier to target within 25m range, cost 60 mana, cooldown 1 minute. These were all very nice skill bumps. Rejuvenate was starting to become less and less effective as I fought harder mobs. Hopefully, it would keep leveling every 3 levels or so. The increase to my strength buff was a major boon as now I could keep it active all the time. It was still quite expensive versus my Wind Walk spell, but I was glad nonetheless. Even my Venerable Earth Fist got a decent bump in damage ability, going from the 0.25 modifier bonus to the 0.34, which was quite an increase. That bumped the damage potential of Earth Fist from 108 to 144. It was my single most powerful ability to do constant damage at the moment. It also had versatility as a speed boosting platform if I could train some more with it that way. Now that I was level 8, I wanted to see what my health, mana, and regen rate were at with the boost to the modifier. HP, 432, 475. Mana, 432. Mana regen, M126. Excellent, I was now recovering my mana at 2 per second. It was getting to the point where I would be able to use my cheaper abilities non-stop during a fight without having to worry too much about running out of mana. While I was going over my stats, I noticed my icon lit up letting me know Area of Denial was reset and it was now time to put my plan in motion. I could hear a horde of the little buggers on the other side of my improvised wall and I smiled. I had been thinking about this tactic since my fight with the crazy black dragon mage and I wanted to see how well it worked, or if it worked at all. I walked right up to the wall and cast Seismic Strike to rile the centipedes up since it didn't do a whole lot of damage. When I heard the centipedes clamoring at the wall even fiercer, I knew it was time. Pressing myself against the barrier, I cast Area of Denial, causing the logs and corpses to shoot down the tunnel 20 or 30 feet as my barrier forced them away from me at high speed. The results were spectacular. Crushed and mutilated corpses of rock centipedes lay strewn about and I waded through the remains to kill any survivors. Newton said you can suck on his law, I said, stomping through the remains, bashing anything alive. All in all, 40 centipedes had died from my improvised claymore, and I even got a nifty notification or 4 for it. Congratulations, you are the first person in your zone to deal over 1000 damage with one strike, 1500 XP awarded. Congratulations, you are the first person on your planet to deal over 10,000 damage with one strike, 15,000 XP awarded. Congratulations, you are the first person in your zone to kill 40 creatures in a single attack, 400 XP awarded. You have earned the title Overkill. If your attack brings a creature down to less than 5% health, they die immediately. The XP rewards were awesome, but I was curious about the 40 creatures one. It said a single attack, so I could definitely see a bunch of min-maxers training huge groups of mobs that had been weakened and then just finishing them all off with 1 week AoE. I looked at my experience bar. Even with that much experience, my bar only moved up 18%, not including the experience from the monsters. I decided to reset the barrier as soon as my zone spell wore off. It was time to grind. I continued this process for another 6 hours, getting past the halfway point on my experience bar before I needed to rest. I managed to trick the bugs into spitting all over my barrier, making it even harder to get past, and I piled up even more wood before sitting down next to the glowing coals of my fire. I used some string I had in my bag along with the chitin shells as an alarm system. If the wall was disturbed too much, the shells would start clacking together, making an awful racket. During my downtime, I slept fitfully, popping awake every few hours to see that the barrier was undisturbed other than the sounds of all the tiny feet and jaws clacking on the other side. It appeared intact, so I dozed off again. I only managed a few more hours of sleep and upon waking decided to try my hand at crafting some replacement armor. Or even just a new chest piece to replace my holy version, amen. I had a rough idea of what I wanted to make. Styling it like old Japanese paper armor with overlapping plates. There were more than enough of them, I thought, glancing over to a pile of the chitin coverings. I didn't have any leather cord other than on my current jerkin. What I did have was a lot of nylon cord from my tent and a rope I had packed. I just needed to figure out how to poke holes in the plating to pass the cord through. I looked around for a sharp rock that was big enough to hold yet pointy enough to make a small hole and got to work. I went through 5 plates before I figured out a method to make the holes without cracking the surprisingly delicate plates. Turns out the armor cracked quite easily if you pressed down too hard on the edges, as they were slightly concave on the inside. I hoped that overlapping them would reduce this risk of cracking. If not, I had another idea to try. I managed to get 3 plates together before I had to kill off another large group of centipedes that had started getting through my wall. Another improvised claymore later and some cleanup to follow. I rest-act the wall, recovered more plates and got back to work. It took me 2 more hours before I had 25 plates prepped and ready for assembly. I stacked 5 of the plates together in an overlapping pattern kind of like roof tiles. Now for the test, I said, slamming my staff down on the plates. They all cracked under the blow. Well shit, I guess it's time for Plan B. Plan B was, of course, adding runes to the plates. What runes? I had no idea, as I had not had time to invest in furthering my research on them. Surprisingly, the books were one of the few items that had remained in my bag during my tumble down the cliff. A little banged up perhaps, but intact. I pulled them out and started reading, looking for anything that might help me. I found something interesting in my second book, a combination of runes that were said to aid in flexibility while getting older. Maybe I didn't need to make them stronger, just more flexible. Pulling out my little pocket knife, I started scratching combinations of the runes into the back on a few plates to test the efficacy of the pattern. I didn't know if they had to be in any order, or have a design attached to them, like the common Celtic knots. For this test, I decided to keep it simple and only carve the actual runic symbols. After I was done, I equipped each to see the bonus. I wish I had an upgraded identify spell that worked on items. It would have made this process a lot faster. Chitin plate .01 armor -5% flexibility. Okay, the first one was a miss even though I gained the runic combination to decrease flexibility. Maybe it would come in handy later. Chitin plate .01 armor +1% durability. Interesting, but not exactly what I was going for. Another runic combination was stored in my notes. Chitin plate .01 armor +2% flexibility. Perfect, now for a control test. I set the 3 plates down on the flattest spot I could find. I also included a piece that was not infused with runes. I pressed my staff butt end into the plate, slowly increasing the force until it cracked. I did this for 3 more basic plates to try and get a feel for the standard breaking point. Then I tried it on the first plate and it broke with a little less force. Next, I moved to the durability one and it surprisingly held up longer than the basic plates by a few seconds. Now for the last plate, I pressed down and the plate creaked and finally snapped. It was an improvement over all my other designs by a bit. I needed to practice and clean up my scribing to hopefully improve on the overall bonus the runes gave. Chapter 15, Rune crafting is hard. Oh god, my hands ached, my body ached, and I was going cross-eyed from all this carving and crafting. Despite the aches and pains, I had finally managed to get my rune crafting skill up enough to eke out a 4% flexibility boost most of the time and a 3% in the rest, making sure those plates went to non-critical areas on my armor. Turns out runes are very sensitive to the overall depth of the carving, and having that depth as consistent as possible increased the effectiveness of the runes. I was sure I was just barely scratching the surface of what runes were capable of. Because of the hard work, I earned the skill armor crafting as I assembled the roughly shaped chitin jerkin, using my old jerkin as a template of sorts as well as a backing material. The plates were quite heavy. I mean, what had I expected from rock centipede armor coming in at around 15 pounds? I did have to sacrifice a shirt to cover the hole in my leather, but it was worth it. Rune crafted leather-backed chitin jerkin. Quality, low. Armor, 12. Slashing resistance, 25%. Acid resistance 10%. This layered plate jerkin was crafted by a novice crafter with subpar materials. Each plate was painstakingly rune crafted to improve the flexibility of the armor. Because of this, any movement penalties for armor are based on light armor. It wasn't much to look at, bits of cloth and colorful nylon rope sticking through dark gray plates. It looked like someone's very first attempt at cosplay. I guess that wasn't far from the truth. I even got experience for my first crafted armor and rune crafted item. Congratulations for crafting your first set of armor, you receive 500 XP. Congratulations for crafting your first set of runic armor, you receive 1500 XP. All in all, it took me 62 of the plates to cover the majority of the armor. I made sure to pack as many of the plates as I could fit in my bag after that, which turned out to be about 120 plates. The XP was a nice boost, although at this point it was just a drop in the bucket. Work on the armor had taken far longer than I had anticipated, mostly due to my having to stop every few hours and clear out the mobs. I think it was time to finish off this dungeon and move on. My area of denial spell was off cooldown and I cast it, blasting the barrier away. I waded through the destruction as I moved down the passage, killing anything in sight. I cut through the groups of mobs much easier now with my extra level and armor. They also seemed to hesitate for a split second when they spotted the plating as if unsure. I didn't mind, it was an extra second for me to bash a skull in. I continued moving down the hall deeper and deeper, going past my previous depth. After killing off 6 more groups I reached the boss room. Helgatha Rock Centipede Queen Level 7. The cave was large, covered in thousands of tiny rock centipedes, all the way up to the nearly full-grown ones and the queen, at least 20 feet long, curled around a massive clutch of eggs. Well, that explains the endless waves of mobs. I murmured. Orcan man, I heard you had a pest problem. Have no fear, for I am here, I said in my most macho voice, striding into the birthing chamber while casting seismic strike. The queen shrieked as her eggs and young died from my spell. The sheer death as my spell went off was fan-fucking-tastic. Dead insects were falling from the walls and ceiling like drops of rain, smelly nasty rain that got caught in my hair and mouth. Oh god, the taste. I whipped a stunning gust off at the queen as she was rearing back to hawk a massive spit at me. The stun landed and she flopped over, twitching. The few remaining adolescents that survived my first attack scurried towards me and I went at them with gusto. Their attacks were much weaker than the adults and Rejuvenate and Healing Touch was more than enough to keep up with the 30 or so I had to fight off. Any time the queen awoke I would either hit her with another stunning gust. If it activated I left her alone, if not I smashed her with an earth fist. The rest of the children died and with one final earth fist I finished off the queen. Congratulations, you are the first adventurer to clear this dungeon. For this epic feat, you have been awarded 1 free skill slot. For clearing this dungeon solo you have been awarded 1000 credits, for being the first person to clear this dungeon you have been awarded 800 additional credits. You have earned the title Bane of Arthropods, 15% additional damage when fighting hard-shelled insects. Additional rewards are being calculated based on waves you survived before clearing the dungeon. Calculating. You survived 302 waves. For being the first person on your planet to survive more than 50 waves in a horde dungeon you receive 1 stat point. For being the first person on your planet to survive more than 100 waves in a horde dungeon you receive 1 stat point. For being the first person on your planet to survive more than 150 waves in a horde dungeon you receive 1 stat point. For being the first person on your planet to survive more than 200 waves in a horde dungeon you receive 1 stat point. For being the first person on your planet to survive more than 250 waves in a horde dungeon you receive 1 stat point. For being the first person on your planet to survive more than 300 waves in a horde dungeon you receive 1 stat point. This dungeon will cease to be in 12 hours. HOLE shit, 6 stat points all for just surviving round after round of abuse. If I would have known that I would have farmed this dungeon for all it was worth. I was kicking myself now for my lack of patience. It was doubtful I would ever come across an opportunity like this again. It was odd though that I didn't get another notice for killing more than 40 creatures, maybe the system only recognized adult creatures for that specific reward. I decided not to waste time and I looted the queen. She dropped 6 exquisite chitin plates, 2 exquisite mandibles, and a mana heart. The mana heart resembled a rough-cut gem. I made room for all the good stuff in my backpack, making my way back to the cave entrance. With 12 hours I had enough time to rest and recover before this place vanished. On my way back up I decided to assign my stat points. 1 in intelligence, 1 in agility, 1 in perception, 1 in strength, and 2 in luck. It felt right to round out some of my weaker stats with these essentially free points. I was a little miffed about losing my baseball cap in the fall, that extra point in perception would be helpful. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter Level 8. Strength, 12, plus 2, modifier x9. Endurance, 16 modifier x27. Agility, 14, plus 2, modifier x9. Perception, 13 modifier x9. Intelligence, 17 modifier x27. Wisdom, 14 modifier x9. Charisma, 11 modifier x9. Luck, 14 modifier x9. HP, 432, 475. Mana, 459. Mana Regen, M126. The only visible change was to my mana, although, I did feel slightly stronger, slightly faster, and able to pick up on details quicker than before. As for the luck stat, that remained to be seen. That last room and boss had gotten me to about quarter way on my experience bar, which was no small matter considering all the mobs in that last room were under level 5 except the queen. Chapter 16, Back on Track. After clearing the dungeon, I slept a good 9 hours before I awoke to the chime on my wind-up watch going off, it was turning out to be one of the best items I owned. Stretching, I got up and got my gear ready. I wanted to stick around and see what happened to a dungeon after it ceased to be, instead of just reset like Frotzar said they should do, but perhaps that was only for normal dungeons and not the horde style. So I made my way to a nearby small hill, to wait the last few hours. As the time ended, the ground started to rumble a bit and dust poured from the dungeon entrance before the whole section collapsed in on itself. Well, that was anticlimactic, I said, getting up from my spot and moving back south along the winding ravines. It took me all day to cross the scar, mostly because of a few weak monster encounters I had to deal with and one very large one that I had to hide from. There were also the switchbacks and dead ends. Now that I was at the end of the scar, I had to figure out how to climb out, something that had completely slipped my mind until just now. Well, this is just great, I said, kicking a rock and grumbling at my stupidity. I had some rope left, but it wasn't nearly enough to scale these cliffs. My only other option was to locate a less steep exit. I walked along the cliff, keeping it to my right side for an hour before I found a rock slide that looked promising. There appeared to be plenty of downed trees and boulders to get a footing on and make my way up the slope, so I started climbing. I huffed and puffed, pulling myself over the edge of the cliff finally. I just rolled over on my back and lay there trying to catch my breath. That sucked, I said through gulps of air. My body ached from the climb. Who knew scaling a 100-foot cliff with only your hands and feet would be so arduous? Never seen anyone do that before, a voice to my side said. I bolted upright despite my aching body, making a karate motion as my staff was tucked into my pack webbing. Standing there was a 3-foot-tall man with a long nose and pointy ears, wearing loose traveling gear and no weapon that I could see. If he was green and warty, I would have assumed he was a goblin. My guess was on gnome. Don't sneak up on someone like that, I squeaked out, you're liable to get hurt. I needed to get some skill or up my perception even more. This was the second time someone had inadvertently snuck up on me. Ol Drang ain't too worried about being hurt by some exhausted traveler like yourself. Let me guess, you're Drang, I said, using identify on the man. Ol Drang, Wanderer level XX. I be, the man said simply, spitting out something he had been chewing on. And who might you be? You can call me Paul, I said, eyeing the mysterious man and his high level warily. I was trying to head south to a town I knew. So you're a native of this world? Yes, I replied, assuming that was what he meant. And this here, he said, waving to the scar. Well, not from this world, that's for sure. I named it the Scar. Fitting name. Don't suppose you know how far around, he said in his odd drawling voice. Unfortunately, no, I kind of fell down on one end and came back up this end. If I had to guess, 3 to 4 days at least. Ol Drang just harumphed as he stared at the scar in contemplation. If you're thinking about going down there, I would advise against it. There is something big and nasty in those valleys. The man just waved away my concern. If you be looking for the road south, it be about half an hour in that direction, he said, pointing me back the way I had come. Best to stay off that road though, foul things be traveling it. Thanks, I said. I guess good luck, I said, stumbling over my words, not knowing what to say to the man as I left. He just harumphed again and waved me to go. Odd man, I thought, starting back towards the road so I could get my bearings and head south again. I should have a decent lead on Fiona or the group that I suspected to be those black dragons I ran into up north. As long as they kept to this route, there were a few other ways they could go, but this was the most direct path towards any of the larger cities. The going was easy outside of the scar and I made good time to the road. I could see many more abandoned and burned out vehicles and smoldering ruins of houses in the distance on this side of the scar. Geez, someone really didn't like houses, I said, scanning the surroundings. I doubt there would be many people living outside of walled towns or villages within a year from now if this kept up. The road was almost eerie with how quiet it was. I remembered to pull out my staff so I had it at hand in case of attack. The land on this side of the scar had returned to the flat farmland it had been from before the system. I was far enough south now that the dense trees of the Northwoods were long behind me. I knew that there were some small hills and minor rock outcroppings that the road cut through on its way southwest before turning again to the south on an adjacent highway. Glancing at the nearest mile marker and figured I had 60 miles to go, at least on the old highway. I knew the route well from my frequent trips north. That is, unless I run into another transplanted landmass, which seemed likely at this point. Sighing at the realization that this trip would probably take me at least 5 more days of hard travel didn't excite me one bit. I hefted my pack and got moving, daylight was burning. I only traveled along the road for a few minutes before I saw figures in the distance and I decided to hide near a burned-out house close to the road. The figures turned out to be a group of men and women, human men and women wearing leather motorcycle outfits and sporting an array of nasty-looking knives, bats, and other assorted weapons. There were 6 of them in total and they stopped about 100 feet from the house. "I'm telling you, Frank, I saw something moving around the road near here," a tall lanky man sporting a baseball bat said. "Yeah, well, where did they go, squirrel? You going to track them through the countryside?" A burly man with a full beard said. "Bad enough we got them damn orcs attacking our campsite," the man said, grumbling, "we don't need any more monsters coming around here." That one had to be Frank. I decided to test my luck with this group, partly because they were the first pre-system humans I had come across that seemed combat capable, that weren't outright hostile. Plus it would just be nice to talk to someone from before the world turned into a hellhole of crazy beasts and ridiculously powerful lunatics that only seemed to want to kill me for my sweet experience. I decided to risk it. At worst I believed I could escape this group. I stood up slowly from behind the house and the group instantly spotted me gripping their weapons tight. I kept my hands high as I approached the group, stopping well away from them, mostly because they told me if I got any closer they would shoot me. Rude. "Hold it right there, stranger," Frank said, pointing a shotgun at me. I wasn't overly worried about the shotgun, and I was even close enough to get a read on the group. Frank Castellino, Rider level 4. Perry Squirrel Mathis Scout level 3. I couldn't see the other names as they were outside my range, but I expected similar levels to these two. My anxiety ratcheted down at seeing the levels. "Whoa there, just passing through, trying to go south," I said calmly. I knew from before the system this area had an uptick in meth and biker gangs in the last decade, and if that's who these people were I didn't want to anger them if it could be helped. Since they weren't shooting first I figured they probably weren't meth dealers or meth heads. "He ain't wearing one of those black armbands," Squirrel said helpfully. "I can see that, stupid," Frank replied in irritation. "Why are you alone?" he said, using the shotgun barrel to make his point. "Well, I was given a mission," I started to say but got interrupted by Frank. "A mission by who? The government? Are they the ones who made the world go topsy-turvy like this?" With each question, the man asked, I could hear more anger seeping into his voice. "What? No. I met a group of how should I put this? Outsiders? Yeah, I guess that's the best way to describe them for now. They were transported here along with God knows what else. These other humans were soldiers and asked me to get into contact with their leadership through something called the bazaar." The group looked at me with blank stares. This was going to be harder to explain than I thought. "So these soldiers," Frank asked, "they have a safe zone?" "I wouldn't exactly call it safe, but they have a walled-off barracks with some pretty high-level individuals." "You hear that, fellas? We can move the civilians finally," Frank said to his party, and I could almost see the tension drain from the group at this news. "Your friend there mentioned black armbands?" I asked, almost dreading the answer. "Yes, steer clear of those nut jobs. They have been rounding up locals and driving them like cattle to the south. We saved as many as we could and tucked them away in a safe location for now, but the orcs found us and have been harassing our campsite for a few days now." I groaned. "You wouldn't be referring to the Black Dragons, would you?" "Yeah, that's what we overheard one of them call themselves. Looks like there were more of them than I thought. At least I knew I was on the correct path." "Well, shit," I said, not caring if they saw my distress. "Had a run-in with them already?" Frank asked, a worried look in his eyes. "Yeah, the same town the barracks is in. Seems they had a smaller group up there, possibly 10 to 20 people. I met their lunatic of a leader in the area. She was a level 17 mage when I last saw her, and that was what, 4 or 5 days ago. I believe they might be heading this way though. I can show you where the town is and where I suspect those other black dragons might be, on my map if you like." Frank thought it over before deciding to lower his shotgun and wave me closer. I showed him the general area of the town, where the barracks were located, and where I was told her territory was. I told him I could only guess at which direction the group possibly went in, and they may want to wait it out a few more days before heading north. I also told him about the frogmen or sulid that seemed to infest the area, as well as the other locals that I assumed were just angry men with guns. I pointed out the scar and that they should travel around it and pack as much food as they could carry. He said the food wasn't an issue, as apparently orc taste just like a pig. I gagged a little at the thought of eating an intelligent creature, but it was good to know. He thanked me for my information and gave me some of his own. Frank said the road south now ran through a dense forest, or what was left of the road did. He said that's where the orcs had first appeared and that there were other monsters. There was also apparently now a mountain range in the state that could be seen from some of the taller hills far to the west, that seemed to stretch from north to south. He told me to be careful of the Black Dragon patrols as they roamed in groups and collected anyone that they spotted. I nodded my thanks and the group quickly headed off to the east. I decided to mull over my options. I could stay on the road and head south, which sounded to me like the fastest route and the likeliest that I would be caught out by the Black Dragon search squads. They could only be collecting people for one purpose if what the commander said was true, and it wasn't good. The other option was to just cut straight south from here and cross-country it to my destination. This would probably be the safest route but would likely take me quite a bit longer, as I would have to cut across farmland, the small streams in the area, and the clumps of forest that still dotted the landscape. I made my choice and decided to veer off the road, taking a straighter if more difficult path. Chapter 17 – Meet the new neighbors. The rest of the day was uneventful and I managed to find an abandoned hunting shack to spend the night. It wasn't very warm, but it was off the ground and had walls on 4 sides. There was no door, but an old blanket was slung over the opening, keeping most of the weather out. I thought it a bit weird that I hadn't encountered any monsters this way. It's almost like the land had been cleared of anything hostile. I decided to string up some of my improvised kite and plate alarm systems to warn me in case I had a visitor in the night. I wasn't tired yet and there was a bit of light left, so I decided to study my rune books some more. I felt that runic magic could be a force multiplier that few would suspect if I could master it. It also synergized well with my mantra-based magic. After a while of reading, I got a notification. Congratulations, you have studied runes to the extent that the accumulated knowledge has unlocked a specific tab in your character sheet. I was confused at first, as I already had a tab that showed runic combinations, until I opened the tab that the system was referring to. Turns out this new runic knowledge tab contained all of the runes I studied so far, as well as a description based on my understanding of what they did. There were many runes listed that I had seen but had no knowledge on, and those descriptions were blank. Even some I don't remember ever coming across in my books were listed on this tab. Unfortunately, it only gave the name of the rune and not the symbol, so I couldn't carve them to see what they did. The largest amount of information was contained in the runes I used in my combinations. Turns out my combinations were barely functional according to the following information, not that I was surprised. I continued reading the book on runes, watching it add more information to my knowledge base. By the end of my reading session, I had a decent understanding of the contents of my first book contained in my knowledge base. Now if I ever lost the books or they were taken away, I would still retain all knowledge I had read. It even filled in some of the unknown runes, although I still had quite a few of those. When did I even come across runes, other than when my father taught me? Closing the book, I put it away and lay down to get any sleep I could. I woke early, having slept undisturbed. I ate a light meal, packed up my gear, and popped my head out the door, making sure it was clear. There was nothing outside the shack that I could see, so I made my way down the ladder and started off on my journey again. My next stop was a house I spotted the day before. It lay on the opposite side of the field from my sleeping spot. I could have spent the night in the house, but with the roaming bands of monsters and humans capturing or burning everything in sight, I figured it was safer in the forest. I approached the house from the rear, away from the roadside, staff in hand, and spells prepared just in case. The door was closed and it looked like the windows were boarded up. I decided to knock to see if I got a reply. I listened carefully and could hear some shuffling and clipped whispers from inside. It didn't appear that they were going to greet me, and I wasn't about to get into it with some scared farmer and his family. Just because guns didn't do much damage doesn't mean it didn't hurt like hell to get shot. I decided to warn the family of the danger and let them know where the guard could be found. While I may not trust the Royal Guard completely, it might be the best option for some people. It's why I didn't try to deter Frank and his group from heading that way. With my good deed of the day done, I moved on to the next house. I wasn't looking for wayward families, no, I needed supplies. I watched the next house from some small bushes for a few minutes. The back door was open and swaying slightly in the wind. I scanned the surroundings looking for any movement. Nothing made itself known, so I decided to make my move. I sprinted across the 100 or so feet of the backyard, coming to a stop outside the door. I glanced inside and spotted legs poking out from an adjacent room. They were not human legs. I stepped across the threshold, trying to move as quietly as possible, keeping my staff level, as there would not be enough room in the house to swing the weapon horizontally. Slowly, I made my way to the room with the body. The scene that awaited me was horrible. 3 pig-faced bipedals that I assumed were orcs lay on the ground with dozens of gunshot wounds, but that wasn't what was horrible. On the opposite end of the room, ripped to shreds, lay the remains of a man, his wife and 3 young children. I turned to the side and vomited my breakfast. After that, I quickly left the room of death. It took me a few minutes to stop dry heaving and accomplish what I had initially come here to do. Finding the kitchen, I ransacked the cupboards for any canned goods that I could add to my meager remaining supplies. There was a large selection of baby food, and with a deep sigh, I tossed the jars into my bag along with cans of tuna and other canned goods. Digging through the drawers, I found a can opener that I tossed into my bag as well. That's when I heard the creak. On instinct, I dove to the side and felt a blade flash past, followed by a thunk as it stuck itself into the countertop. As I hit the ground, I spun, casting Earth Fist, or I tried to. Forgetting that there was a basement in this house, and Earth Fist only worked if the ground was within a few feet. I scrambled away and around the kitchen island. The orc was growling, trying to get his sword out from the counter as another orc came running in. I was caught with my pants down on this one. My staff had been set aside to speed my food search, and the orc stood between me and my gear. I had one option to try, as I cast Area of Denial on myself and rushed through the room right at the second orc. The creature grinned evilly, thinking I was trying to run past him to escape. He raised his sword high to strike me down. His sword slid across my dome, and the dumbstruck look on his face lasted long enough for my dome to slam into him. If this had been a test of strength, I would have easily lost, but this was a magical defense, and the brute was slammed against the wall, dropping his sword. I tried picking it up, but the field that protected me pushed the loose item from my area. Swearing, I cast Aura Strike on my fist and hit the disoriented orc, causing more damage to my hand than I caused to him, although, the spell's effect triggered and he was slowed. I turned around to see the other enraged orc running at me, and I just stood there as he bounced off my spell barrier, having missed what happened to his cohort. I pushed him off to the side, getting into a position to grab my staff as soon as my spell ended. I could try to use my seismic strike, but this house looked old and I doubt it would stand up against the spell if it even worked. I suspected it worked like my Earth Fist, requiring ground contact. The orc looked at me warily, waiting. He knew he had me trapped and must assume I had some ability active. It was only a matter of time for him. When my timer hit 3 seconds, I roared and made to charge at the sword-wielding orc and his now recovered ally. They took a step back reflexively, and I pivoted, running to grab my staff just as the spell ended. I wasn't quick enough to avoid the blow entirely, and the orc's nasty curved sword sliced a long furrow in my bicep. I winced at the pain, instead of crying out. Which says a lot about the amount of pain I have received lately. Grabbing my staff, I whirled around, having to recast Flurry as it cannot remain active on an unequipped weapon, and I struck out with my now 9 punishing blows. The monster even managed to block one of the blows, but his animal hide armor-covered torso did little to blunt the force of my impacts as he staggered back, spitting up blood. I followed that attack up with a quick stunning gust, causing the creature to topple over. Checking my notices, I saw it was still alive. I changed my focus to the second orc. He had rearmed himself. I took this time while we sized each other up to get his stats. Charloak Orc Hunter level 6. This was surprising in and of itself. The only names I had come across had been on intelligent creatures, not that I had any issue killing them, at least not anymore. I was just in a bit of a hurry, plus I didn't know how many were in the area. From speaking with Frank and his group, it seemed like there might be quite a few of these orcs around, so I decided to try something. So is this how all orc hunters fight, like cowards, by sneaking up on unsuspecting prey? Grrrrrr, what you know of honor, human? We see the dead. You kill, yes. What? No, I didn't kill them, although, perhaps I should have after what they did to that family, I responded angrily. Family capruer and kills pack mate, gets what they deserve, Charloak said, slurring certain words with his mouth full of tusks. Yet, well, I'm not part of that family and I didn't kill any of your pack, so why did you attack me? We sees you enter building from Trilene. You humans hunting orc packs, we's here to stop you, he growled and charged at me. Guess the dialogue was finished. I smashed his sword out of the way and dashed for the back door. I needed to get outside to use the rest of my skills effectively. I didn't particularly want to kill these orcs, but they didn't seem content to just let me go. Something large whizzed by my head scant inches away as I ran for the door. Did you just throw a boot at me? Don't you know how dangerous a boot to the head is? Savages, I thought to myself as I ran out the back door. I turned and smiled as Charloak ran through the same door only seconds later. Smashing an earth fist into his knee as he charged at me, causing him to tumble to the ground. I was about to rush back in to attack the injured orc before I heard a horn blare from my left. Swinging my head around towards the sound, I saw 6 more orcs running towards the house. This horn was followed by a score more. I had a decision to make. Look, this has been fun and all, but I gotta go. Let's just say we're even. You both tried to kill me and I tried to kill you, I said, running away from the enfeebled orc. Gets back here, human, so I can tear off your arms, he bellowed. How about a rain check? I said, sprinting into the forest and out of sight. More hunting horns followed me as I ran through the forest. They were going to try and box me in. At least I had been correct to flee instead of fight. My last count was 26 separate horn blasts. Perhaps I could have killed the 2 at the house before their reinforcements arrived, but I would have had to fight my way through more and more with no guarantee that I would be able to get away, let alone survive. Especially now that my trump card was used up for the next 3 hours. These creatures weren't like the Sulid or the humans that I fought earlier, except for the mage. These orcs were clever and well-prepared adversaries, and they had numbers on their side. Perhaps I would return to eliminate this threat once I gained some more strength. I also had to remember that I couldn't save or avenge everyone. That was a surefire way to get myself killed. I ran as fast as I could run, and damn could I run. My endurance, strength, and agility were all above human average with my buffs, even though strength was still one of my weakest stats. I felt like an Olympic sprinter as I ran through the forest, dodging trees and a few arrows that were fired at me from distance. The orcs were strong physically, but they didn't appear to be all that fast, and I was able to outrun the horns after 20 minutes or so. I was even nice enough to leave a nice clear trail of blood to follow. That was until just now. I healed up my wound and washed the blood off in a small stream nearby. I had led them on a path west, well away from the humans I had run into previously, and off of my path south. Now that I was cleaned up and had time to catch my breath, I jogged southwest again to skirt well away from any possible hunting party that could have been following me. The farther south I went, the thicker the trees got. It was easy to tell these weren't the normal trees from this area or even this world. For one, they were a shade of green so vivid it was almost blue, and their leaves were wide. Some of the trees resembled willows with their large draping canopies. I steered clear of those trees, not from any insight or anything. Nope, I didn't need that. The large ring of small bones that surrounded them said enough for me. The forest was getting so thick overhead that very little light filtered down between the branches. This meant there wasn't much ground cover, which was nice. The trees also got larger the farther I went into this strange zone. They weren't reaching sequoia size yet, but they were bigger than any tree I had seen otherwise. The forest was surprisingly peaceful. I could hear small animals and birds flitting through the trees, but there had been no sign of anything larger. And just like that, the forest ended again. A quick look at my watch told me I had been walking for 6 hours. I tried to get a bearing on where I was in relation to my target, but I wasn't familiar with this area, so I had to find the nearest road crossing and take out my map. It took me a while to find the road on the map, and I cursed. I was farther west than I had wanted to be, and there was a river cutting across my path that I had forgotten about. This usually wasn't a big deal, but the closest bridge crossing was back on the main road that I wanted to avoid. I could travel farther west 5 miles or so to the next crossing. I thought about it for a few minutes before deciding. For safety's sake, I choose the bridge west of my current position. Chapter 18, The Enemy You Know. I spent a good part of the morning cursing up a storm. Hours wasted going to the western bridge only to find someone had blown it up or destroyed it with magic. Didn't really matter. There were no more options west as I was starting to close in on those new mountains, and I decided not to chance it. I ended up having to bunker down for the night under some fallen logs while it rained. I was wet and grumpy, and now I had to backtrack to the bridge that I had wanted to avoid. If these black dragons were even semi-organized, and it sure seemed like they were, they would have the only bridge within miles under guard. I hate when I'm right, I muttered under my breath as I sat in some bushes a good 100 yards from the bridge. The hill I sat on was a good vantage point, allowing an unobstructed view to see across the bridge and the hive of activity beyond. It was easy to discern what was happening as groups of people led by a few others were herded like livestock into large fenced-in areas. Anyone that stepped out of line was cut down with weapon or magic. Occasionally groups were taken away somewhere that I couldn't see. From this distance, I hadn't been 100% sure that these were the black dragons, at least that was until I spotted her. That damned mage from up north. She was hard to miss with her short stature compared to others, but that wasn't all. It was her bearing and the way everyone seemed to bow to her. Behind her, being dragged along by her henchmen, was an unconscious Fiona. Her distinctive armor making it easy to spot her, even from this distance. I hate when I'm right, I hissed quietly. They had Fiona and I would lose out on my mission if I couldn't rescue her, but a more alarming concern was they had her alive. Which means they probably needed something from her that she didn't want to give up, likely information. This would lead to only one other thing, torture. There was no other reason to keep her alive since they weren't stuffing her in with the rest of the prisoners. If I wanted to fulfill my mission I had to come up with a plan, one that hopefully, didn't result in my death. God, why did I have to be this way? It would be so much easier if I could just brush her off and leave, but I had a feeling making an enemy of the commander would be unwise, and since I was already an enemy of the Black Dragon my meddling wasn't likely to make it any worse. Or at least that's what I told myself. I watched the female mage take Fiona into a small house close to the far side of the bridge and exit about an hour later with one of her guards. Okay, so one guard left to keep an eye on her, now how to get across the bridge. I focused on the bridge with the 3 guards and the makeshift barricade of razor wire and sandbags. From here I could make out the guards carrying guns. From my experience, anyone who carried a gun had either a shit class, for whatever reason, or was on the low end of the totem pole in this new world, as I also noticed Miss Black Dragon's guards had upgraded or been upgraded and no longer sported the less than useful weapons. Both appearing to be armed with a set of swords. It made sense for the bridge guards to sport guns still. It had been drilled into people for ages that guns were dangerous after all, so it was a natural response to not piss off the guy holding a gun. My options were pretty limited for getting across. My only quiet skills were Earth Fist, Aura Strike, Flurry of Blows, and Stunning Gust. Well, quietish, with the guards being stationed on the bridge that meant my Earth First was no use. The rest weren't really useful in taking out 3 people in silence. That's when I saw an opportunity. I smiled and started back down the hill to wait. The group of 3 goons walked down the road, guns slung across their backs without care. As soon as they got close enough I checked their stats. They were level 5, all with soldier classes, yet they sported the black armband, and that was what I was after. I wondered, if they forced their underlings to pick certain classes, it sure seemed that way. I continued to let them get closer, preparing my staff spells. When they were within 10 feet of my hiding spot I popped up and cast Seismic Strike. I could tell I surprised them as they fumbled to pull their guns off their backs, but I got my spell off before they could, and unlike centipedes, these jokers all fell over. One even lost his gun as it went flying from his grip. I decided to reward him with an Earth Fist to his face as he fell, hearing a loud crack as I rushed the other 2. A Stunning Gust was flung out at the most competent one and he collapsed on the ground. The last one standing almost got a shot off until I shoved my staff into his gut, triggering Flurry as I did so. The first strike drove the air out of him and I moved my staff up, crushing his ribs with each successive strike. The man died on the 7th strike. I switched target to the man with the broken jaw, cracking him over the head with a violent overhead smash. Critical strike, you have crushed soldier's head. I had decided to toggle off the names in my options for when I fight intelligent creatures. I no longer wanted to know the name of the people I was forced to kill. It was bad enough their faces haunted my dreams already. The last man was starting to shake off my stunning effect, so I went over and finished him off. While my heart still pumped fiercely from the battle, it seemed like I was getting used to the battle lust. It didn't seem to impact me as much anymore. I should feel something from killing 3 humans, but I didn't. My life had changed so radically within a week that something like this didn't affect me much anymore. It just came down to it being a necessity. I am sure the faces would be added to my nightmares, a growing army of angry ghosts asking, why? I dragged the bodies off the road and into a ditch with tall grass and reeds. It would do for now to keep their bodies from being discovered. I grabbed one of the black armbands. From what I could tell they all appeared to be the same, and I hadn't seen anyone saluting or being deferential to anyone but that mage woman. If it got me across the bridge that would be best, but if it even got me to within striking distance of the guards on the bridge I could take it from there. I decided to loot the corpses as well. I found a few credits, a knife that I strapped on, and a silver ring. At first glance, I thought it was just a simple ring, but when I touched it, it felt odd. No, it can't be, I whispered and opened my inventory tab. There in my inventory was my backpack and the ring as storage items. I did a little shimmy of joy at this. Finally, I had a dimensional storage item and decided to check the ring's storage space. The ring could store up to 3 cubic feet of items. I wondered if the items had to be under that 3-foot length to fit, or if it only measured total volume. My first thought was to try my staff, but I quickly changed my mind as I didn't want the ring to possibly damage my only weapon. My next thought was to try and toss a body in to see what that would do, but decided against that ghoulish idea at least for the moment. I looked around for something to try and my eyes landed on the stop sign, specifically the post. I bet most people didn't realize just how tall these things were. I know I didn't until I was standing right next to it and the top of my head barely reached the bottom of the sign itself. First I tried just grabbing the pole and thinking storage, but I felt a wave of vertigo at that and I almost threw up. Ugh, okay, not sure why that happened, perhaps because it's stuck in the ground. Now how to get you out of the ground? I thought as my head cleared. I decided to use Earth Fist to force the sign out of the ground. It took 2 casts to force the sign and the concrete base out enough for me to use the ring on it. This time there was no vertigo as the pole disappeared inside the ring. I guess that was a warning that you were passing the ring's limit on storage space. I decided to check the storage tab to see what it said. I was surprised to see that the pole and the concrete took up less than 1 cubic foot of space. That can't be right, I said, scratching my head in thought, unless it accounts for empty space as well. I recalled the pole from the ring and it appeared from the ring in my hand unbent and undamaged from storage. Noise, I said smugly, setting the useless pole back into the ground. The ring had a few other tidbits inside, mostly food and some collars labeled as slave collars. Disgusting, I thought, almost tossing them, but decided against it for the moment. Who knew if they might come in handy, and it also explained the large number of prisoners. But why bother with prisoners or slaves at all, instead of killing them all for the experience? I mean, it's what they were doing up north, or at least that's what the commander suspected them of doing. No, they had to be using them for something. My thoughts clicked as pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. Could this explain the Chaos Mage's quick rise in level? Frotzar did say some skills allowed war leaders to share in the experience. Did she possibly possess a skill like that, or similar to it? I also wondered where they got all the gear from. It didn't seem likely that they purchased it in bulk from the bazaar, considering how short a time had passed since the system went live. Were they staging weapons and magical gear prior to the system startup? If that were true, it would explain a few things: the weird message from the system, Frotzar's warning, and the seemingly instant creation of the black dragons right after the system went live. I would have to see if I could uncover anything while I was in the camp. I let that train of thought percolate in the back of my mind as I fiddled with the ring some more. I tried putting my backpack in the ring but got the same vertigo sensation, only not as severe as before. Instead, I emptied the contents of my bag, taking each item into the ring. It was a slow process, but it felt nice not having the weight of my bag slowing me down anymore. Everything fit with plenty of room to spare, so I tossed my staff inside and 2 of the guns. I equipped the best gun, which wasn't saying much, but it helped with my disguise. I took the other 2 armbands as well, just in case. Now the bodies just appeared to be 3 unfortunate souls that ran afoul of something instead of 3 black dragons that were attacked. I walked back down the road from where the men came from. It was a bit nerve-wracking. I had to pretend to belong and was putting on an air of pompous authority, strutting down the road as if I owned it. The other black dragons only gave me a cursory glance as I approached the bridge, and upon seeing my armband ignored me. I was only stopped as I got to the roadblock. "Where is the rest of your team?" one of the men asked in a bored tone. We ran into a larger group of people and they stayed behind to secure them while I went for more men to assist. "Fine," he said, waving me in without a second glance. Operation Screw the Black Dragon was a go. So sue me, it was a working title. I walked past the barricade, covertly glancing to my left and right. Seeing that no one was paying me any additional attention, I made my way to the house I saw the guards take Fiona into. I looked around again before easing the door open as quietly as possible. The entry was empty, so I swapped the gun I stole for my staff and cast Aura Strike and Flurry on it silently just in case. I could hear noises coming from one of the rooms, and as I got closer they got clearer. Smack! "You will tell me what you know, slave, or your beatings will continue until you do." This was followed by a low murmur that I couldn't pick up. "Speak up, insolent trash." I approached the door, noticing that it was slightly open. Peeking inside, I could see a man with his back to the door and Fiona strapped to a chair, stripped of her armor. She was covered in blood and bruises. I decided to check the man's stats. Questioner level 13. His high level wasn't ideal for me, but this seemed like a class that would be more reliant on charisma or intelligence as a stat rather than endurance, or so I hoped. As I quietly eased the door open, I saw Fiona look up. She almost blew my entrance as her eyes started to grow wide, but she managed to school herself quickly. "You should fear," the questioner started to say before I struck out. His aborted scream was cut off as my strike hit his spine, cracking it. The man fell to the ground like a marionette with his strings cut. I was honestly surprised that he was still breathing after taking all 9 of my blows from flurry. I finished him off with a few more whacks to the back of the head. "What are you doing here?" Fiona forced out through bloody lips and a swollen face. They had worked her over good. "I have a mission to complete, so I'm saving your dumb ass," I replied, a bit of heat in my voice. "We can chat later," I added quieter, cutting her free from her bindings. That's when she decided to fall on the floor unconscious. "Ugh, really," I said, shaking my fist at the sky in frustration. I stored her armor in my ring, having to dump a few items to make room, and tossed her over my shoulder in a fireman's carry. It was starting to approach dusk, but I didn't want to wait around in the house any longer, so I headed towards the back door. Glancing out the window, I didn't see anyone. "Time to go," I said to my unconscious load. I made my way east, along the small town's buildings before heading south again. It wasn't long before I was stopped by 2 men wearing black armbands. "Whoa there, fella, would you look at this, Bob?" the man said, tapping his friend on the chest with the back of his hand. "Looks like our new friend here found us a nice nighttime plaything, so how about it, friend? Care to share?" the man asked, both him and his buddy smiling in glee. They must have thought this was their lucky night. I decided to check their stats. Footman level 5. Guard level 4. These 2 were likely nobodies in the dragon's hierarchy, which seemed to have the stronger or higher leveled people rule over the weaker lower leveled, and considering their levels versus some of the other members I came across, these were not high level members. They must have thought I was one of the weaker members, as I had equipped the rifle again and I was also still sporting the armband. "I was kind of hoping to have her to myself, but I guess I could share," I said, feeling the nastiness of my words. "Not here in the street though. You know any house nearby where we won't be disturbed?" I added, trying to put on my creepiest smile. It must have worked, because the man that spoke just smiled and waved for me to follow, and we hurried to a house a few streets over. "There's nobody within a few blocks of here, cleared it last week," the man said, smiling as he opened the door. Both men stepped inside, and as they turned around I tossed Fiona on the guard and he let out a grunt of surprise as he fell to the ground under her dead weight. "She should be fine," I healed her a bit before leaving the house. "All yours, buddy," I said, pulling my staff from inventory and smashing the dumbstruck footman in the throat as he turned. A red glow had started to appear on the man, but as he fell to the ground choking, it disappeared. This had been the first time I saw one of these underlings using an ability, or at least one that had a visible display. I finished him off with a flurry strike as his buddy attempted to extricate himself from Fiona's body. As soon as he was clear, I hit him with a stunning gust and he fell over. "Time for some questions," I said, dragging the stunned man to a chair and tying him to it with the rope I had taken from Fiona's torture room. I used the man's armband as a gag. Then I slapped him on the face to get his attention. The man came back to his senses, trying to scream through his gag, but it only came out like, "MHFF MHFFFF. "Shut up and listen," I said, pulling out the knife I stole earlier. The man's eyes grew wide and he tried to struggle free. "I'm only going to say this once. If you answer my questions, we can go our separate ways, and nobody needs to know that you abandoned your post to come and have a little fun. Nod your head if you agree," I said, waving the knife in front of his face. The man quickly nodded. "Good, now I'm going to remove the gag if you scream. I have no more use for you. Understand?" The man nodded again. I went around behind him and untied the gag, letting him spit the cloth from his mouth. "First question, who is the black dragon and where did they come from?" I can't answer that. If they find out I told anyone, they will kill me," the man said pleadingly. I just tapped the knife on his shoulder, letting him know that if he didn't answer my questions, that I would kill him as well. I needed to become a hard man if I wanted to survive in this new world. "I was recruited a few months ago. They don't tell us low levels much," the man said, fear in his voice. "So you knew about the system?" Not until a week before it started, then they gave us a training session. I thought it was all a joke at first, but they paid well, so I stayed." "Look man, just let me go. If they catch us, they will do worse things than torture us." "So are they from Earth?" Yeah, I mean I think they are. I overheard some fellas say that they started in Chicago in the 80s. Jesus, no wonder they seemed to level so fast. They had taken 40 years to learn how to game the system beforehand." "Next question," I said, ignoring the man's earlier warning, "how many black dragons are there?" "I don't know man, I'm just a low-level grunt." I tapped on his shoulder again, "Make an educated guess." He flinched at my touch, but he answered anyway. "We have around 100 in this area," I heard there were a few up north that got cut off when the system went live early, or at least that's what I overheard. I also heard some are in the metro area to the south, but I didn't hear numbers on them. Their headquarters is located in Chicago, so that's where the majority of them are located. The man's words seemed to stream out once he got started and I had to stop him. So, why you? I asked offhandedly, not really expecting a response. Man, I don't know. They were hiring all kinds of less than savory people. I'm just trying to survive, man, the footman replied, starting to blubber. Question 3, I said without hesitation, knowing the type of people the Black Dragon seemed to employ. Where is the bazaar? The what? The man asked between blubbering breaths. Where did the Black Dragon get magical gear from? The quartermaster brought it up from the staging area, he said through his sobbing. And the high-level woman, the mage, how did she get that level so quickly? She is the district leader, a bigwig sent up to recruit people. Please, if they find out I told you, they will do horrible things to me. Just answer the question, I said with finality. God, this man was spineless. It has something to do with slave contracts, that's all I know. They don't include us guards and soldiers with whatever they're doing to level. We can only order the slaves around as long as we have the armband, he said, his sobbing and blubbering petering off. That was interesting. I could definitely think of a few ways to use that knowledge to my advantage. I couldn't think of any other pressing questions I needed to be answered, and the other unanswered questions I had could wait until I wasn't surrounded by an entire village of hostile people. Before the man could realize my questions were done, I ran the knife across his throat, holding his mouth shut. He spasmed and thrashed in the chair for a bit before going limp as his life force drained away. Another ghost to add to my nightmares. I dropped the knife from shaking hands and ran over to the corner to vomit. There was something decidedly worse about killing someone who couldn't fight back versus fighting someone face to face. I never wanted to have to do something like this again, if I could help it. You performed a death blow on guard. Death blows can be used on targets that are unable to defend themselves. You have reached level 9, modifiers increased by 1, 4 free skill slots available. The system seemed to have a dark sense of humor, giving me a level at this moment. I shook off the shock looking at the notice. At first, I thought the system had awarded me extra skill slots, but I realized it was just counting the 2 I earned as rewards from clearing those dungeons as well as the 2 I got for this level. Adding the new skills would have to wait though, as I needed to escape this town and Fiona was still unconscious. It was probably for the best. Chapter 19, Time for a discussion. I managed to slip us out of town and off towards the east without being spotted. After a few hours I was able to locate a collapsed barn that had just enough room for the 2 of us to spend the night. It was unlikely anyone would find us here even if they knew to start looking. I set the still sleeping woman down on the dirty hay and slumped over myself, exhausted. Before I nodded off, I decided to tie up Fiona's hands and feet, holding the end of the rope tight just in case. Then I fell asleep. I was awoken sometime in the night as I felt a tug on the rope. I heard a weak voice call out, "Paul." "Yeah," I replied simply. I heard her start crying, "Thank you for rescuing me. I'm so sorry for what I did. I thought you were working with the people following us." "I bet you are sorry. That doesn't change the fact that you tried to kill me, does it?" I hissed angrily, trying to keep my voice down. "If it wasn't for your damn commander's mission, I would have left your ass to the Black Dragons." She shook her head, not wanting to say the words out loud or meet my gaze. "So what am I supposed to do with you then? Obviously, I can't trust you to have my back. You are as likely to put a knife in it as help me. Unless you want me to wear this all the time," I said, pulling out one of the black armbands so she got a good look. Using the armband would be a last resort. I didn't want to go down that path if I could avoid it. Fiona cried out and huddled up tighter into the corner, fearful of the strip of fabric I held. I felt bad for doing this, but she needed to know where she stood and that I wasn't playing around. I slowly crawled over to the prone silhouette of the woman and helped prop her up. She was shaking uncontrollably as I touched her. I had not consciously noticed before, but she was a waif of a woman and must have only weighed 90 pounds soaking wet. She just looked so imposing in her armor. I held a bottle to her lips so she could sip it, and she accepted it without protest. She was probably afraid I would activate the armband. She still sported injuries from her time with the Black Dragon. I had chosen not to heal her completely, deciding the system could fix her in time. "Sleep, we can talk in the morning," I said, moving back across the space, my voice still hard. I wasn't worried about her getting loose to attack me or escape. I doubt she would make it far not knowing the terrain and sporting the slave collar still. But just to be safe I slipped the armband on after she went back to sleep. When early morning arrived I kicked her boot to wake her. Her injuries had mostly healed overnight. I untied her hands, readying them in front of her so she could eat and drink. I still had some compassion left in me that the system hadn't beaten out of me yet. Why? I asked simply. That one word caused her to break down in tears again and she refused to look me in the face. I let her get her emotions out of the way and eventually, she answered. The commander said you were hiding something and not to trust you completely, so when I noticed someone following us as soon as we left the town, I thought you had betrayed us. When you stopped to inspect that vehicle my rage grew as I assumed you were slowing us down on purpose so they could catch us, but we moved on before they caught up, so I was left unsure of your true motives. When we got to the cliff and you wanted to stop again so early, it only confirmed my earlier worries had been correct. I had spotted signs of them closing in and I had to flee the area as quickly as possible, but knew I couldn't leave an enemy that knew my destination. She paused there to take a breath. I made it less than a mile before they captured me. Then to my surprise, they wanted to know where you were, and I could tell by the female mage's tone that you were not one of her men. At that point, I realized my horrible mistake. They tortured me there to try and find your whereabouts, but I told them I had slain you and kicked your body off the cliff. The female mage thought that to be a hilariously fitting end for you. But I knew you had survived the fall and that was my only consolation as they dragged me along with them to be tortured some more. Then when we arrived at the encampment they slapped a slave collar around my neck that caused me to obey anyone with the black dragon armband. I fought off the influence of the collar as long as I was able to, and had you not arrived when you did I would have cracked soon and given them the rest of the information they sought. What information was that? I asked, taking in her story. More pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place in my mind. They wanted to know how you had gained levels so quickly, but I didn't know, and that made them angry. They also wanted to know about the barracks and personnel, but I resisted telling them anything about that. I guess the Black Dragon doesn't know every secret to leveling within the system, if they wanted that information from Fiona. Sighing, I said, look, I don't really trust you, you lost that when you tried to kill me. I do believe you though. So, what do I do from here? I was given a mission and I intend on completing it despite the commander's feelings towards me. The black dragons appear to be a blight that needs to be eradicated, but that isn't something you or I am equipped to deal with. That leaves me with only two options. Either I leave you tied up, slowing us down and possibly getting us captured, or I release you and wear the armband. No, please don't do that. She hesitated to say, I can offer you a life bond. I was going to ask her what a life bond was, but the system beat me to it. Fiona Clark has offered you a life bond. Those bound by a life bond cannot harm or injure the person they are bonded to in any way, shape or form. Life bonds are as they are named, for life. Those who break a life bond will suffer increasing amounts of pain until eventually it becomes too much and they are forced to take their own life. Do you wish to accept this bond? Y/N. I didn't really want some strange woman bonded to me for life. It felt way too much like a marriage, and I already went down that road once before. The problem was I didn't see any other option in the time we had. We couldn't afford to sit here all day with the Black Dragon encampment so close. So I chose yes. Fiona Clark has been life bonded to you. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, you won't regret this, she said, sounding a bit manic. I was kind of already regretting it. We need to leave before that mage catches up with us. She is leaving for a place called Chicago, Fiona said, fumbling over the unknown word. Apparently her faction. I guess I could call it that is at war with 3 other groups for that area, and they recalled anyone over level 10 to assist. I overheard this when they thought I had passed out from the beatings. I guess that's why they are rounding up fodder to feed to others in their group to power level them. She obviously wasn't aware of the slave contract and how they were using it to level so quickly. Should I tell her? No, despite this so-called bond I didn't fully trust her just yet. One of the big unknowns was the fact she had a slave collar that would likely override the bond. Plus I wasn't exactly sure how they utilized it to level myself. Best to learn more about it first. It also wasn't great that there seemed to be more than one group that got early access if it was true that 3 groups were fighting it out in Chicago. Bunch of cheaters, I thought angrily. I looked over at Fiona. She was mostly healed, only a few bruises left from her treatment. I pulled out one of the messaging spells Frotsar had given me, imbuing it with my notes and a warning for Frotsar and the commander if he chose to pass it along. Beware Black Dragon outpost at the bridge, no other way around. Female Chaos Mage is here and all Black Dragon over level 10 headed far south. Encampment consists of approximately 100 low-level people and over 1,000 captured civilians. Fiona and I will continue to the bazaar as we have located its likely position. Also, possible friendly natives heading towards your town seeking refuge. As soon as I finished, the piece of metal glowed bright white and turned to dust in my hand. I just hoped that my hunch was correct and that the Black Dragon somehow knew the location of the bazaar ahead of time. The only other explanation was that they somehow had access to magical items way in advance, and I didn't even want to think about what that possibility could bring. Where did you get a message spell? Fiona asked in surprise. From Frotsar, I replied, not seeing what the big deal was. Can I ask you something? Yes, please, I'll answer whatever I can. Okay, first of all, relax. All I wanted to know is why your world hunted down healers, not of the faith. Well, I only know what I have been told by the clergy and paladins. Apparently, it was to protect the sanctity of healing magic, but I suspect that was more a lie they told the public so they could maintain a monopoly on the healing arts, as it brought in quite a bit of credit, she said with a note of anger. Especially now that we were transported over to your world, the clergy can still heal but their gods are silent to their prayers. Some have renounced their faith, saying that if they could still heal, that their god had never provided for this ability in the first place. This almost led to chaos amongst the ranks, but the commander enforced his authority, and anyone affected by the ability cannot speak of this if they are within 10 miles of him. A few of the faithful even ended their lives as they were now lost without a guiding hand, she finished sadly. So, you weren't of this belief? No. I am sure that there is an afterlife and I will see it one day, but I did not follow a specific deity. Most in my world did not. Despite that, the clerics and paladins had a lot of sway in the community and still hunted down people they considered heretics, mostly those using what the clergy deemed unauthorized healing magic. I mulled over what she said when I remembered I had something of hers. No point in taking up space in my ring if she could wear it. Here, I think this is yours, I said, pulling her armor from my ring. She smiled a bit. Thank you for saving my armor, Mr. Paul. God no, please don't start that, just call me Paul. I didn't see your sword in the room with you. Know that shrew of a woman took it as a trophy. I choose to withhold giving her a weapon. Trust needed to be earned no matter what the system said. I was also still wearing the armband under my sweatshirt. I would have to make sure to take it off sometime. We ate another quiet meal and afterward crawled out from our hiding spot to continue on our journey. I slapped myself in the forehead. I almost forgot I leveled up yesterday. I need to pick my new skills. Fiona just gave me an odd look that said, how could you forget you leveled up? It was amazing how women seemed to be able to convey entire thoughts with just a look. I opened up my skills page to see what was available. Making sure to keep Fiona in view. Healing Aura. Your body emits a healing aura that affects all your party members within 20m, heal 150 HP over 30 SEC, excludes caster in effect, cost 75 mana, cooldown 1 minute. Imbue. Imbue your weapon with elemental damage for 60 minutes. Must choose damage type when activating the skill, cannot be changed while active, cost 50 mana, cooldown 60 minutes. Second Chance. Resurrection doesn't exist but this spell comes close. Restores the hit points of spell target to intelligence modifier of caster if target suffers a fatal blow while the spell is active, does not remove any spells or status effects that were active on target before death, duration 6 HOURS, cost 200 mana, cooldown 3 HOURS. Impact. You have a 30% chance of inflicting 3x your weapon damage with each attack, duration 30 minutes, cost 20 mana, cooldown 5 minutes. I immediately grabbed Second Chance. I would be a blind fool not to. Healing Aura and Imbue were still good choices, but I decided against them again in favor of Impact. I also changed my settings to only show current level spells to hopefully keep the clutter down later. I cast the buff on myself, seeing the little icon appear in my vision letting me know it was active. What did you just cast? Fiona asked curiously. Isn't it rude to ask someone about their skills? She lowered her head. You're right, I apologize, my curiosity got the better of me. I gave the woman a closer look, and I realized she couldn't be more than 20. It helped to explain her rash decision-making. I accepted her apology and pointed, we are heading this way. She would find out what the spell was eventually. I wasn't about to let her die if we got into a fight and I had it available to cast. I'm not a monster. She nodded at my words and started walking. She was smart enough to remain in front. I could have told her about the spell, but Frotsar had warned me to not reveal them if I could help it. It was probably best she didn't know right now anyway. We still needed to come to a mutual understanding. As we walked I checked my level 9 stats. HP, 448, 492. Mana, 448. Mana Regen, M140. All of my modifiers went up 1, which was awesome. That meant my flurry skill now did 10 attacks. It was getting to the point that I could hardly see the strikes as my staff became a blur of movement, and I was wondering if there was an upper limit to the skill's progression. I mean, there must be, otherwise it would just continue to grow as I leveled, becoming an extremely overpowered ability. That wasn't the only thing I was happy about. I was now closing in on 500 hit points with my buff active. Although, it looked like I may need to increase my intelligence though, as some of my more powerful abilities would drain my mana quickly. It would be nice not having to be a mana miser on my skills. Considering the abilities I had at my disposal, it seemed pretty balanced, but I didn't want to be balanced, I thought with a smile. If other people were going to game the system, I would do it too. In fact, I already had, multiple times. I doubt Area of Denial was meant to be used to survive a house explosion or be used to fling shrapnel away at high speed. Despite that, the system recognized me as the source of those deaths, granting me the experience and additional rewards, and I had other ideas of ways to help myself along. I just needed some time to work on the details. Chapter 20, Home Sweet Home. We arrived north of the metro area I called home, after another 3 days. Fiona had been the model of good behavior the entire way. She could have left at any time and I wouldn't have stopped her. While I still didn't trust her fully, I had to admit she was trying to make up for her mistake. While she didn't have a weapon, she did have a few useful skills that came in handy in the few encounters with monsters we ran across. Mostly just local mutated wildlife. I had decided to stop using the old city names for most places, as it didn't quite seem to fit the new reality that was our world. Despite that, this entire sprawling urban area had been known as the Fox Valley. It stretched from Lake Michigan down to the southern part of Lake Winnebago. Of course, it wasn't all the same town. There were 3 or 4 major towns connected by a slew of smaller communities, and somewhere in all that mess was the bazaar. It wasn't on the scale of Chicago big, but there had still been 500,000 people living in the area, spread over a roughly 70-mile stretch. I had opted to head towards my hometown first, which just happened to be in the center of all this mess. I wanted to see what had become of my house and see if I could locate any of my friends or family that lived in the area. That would have to wait for a bit though, because right now Fiona and I sat on the second floor of a home across from the major highway. It provided a view of one of the overpasses. It looked like someone had set up multiple barricades backed by heavy machine guns. I could make out people moving back and forth across the bridge, but from this distance couldn't see if they wore any armbands. Now normal pistols and rifles I wasn't too worried about. These, however, looked like 50 caliber machine guns, most commonly mounted to Humvees, either that or those 40mm grenade launchers. I wasn't quite sure from this distance. I didn't like my chances of survival against either of those. Do you see any armbands? I ask, knowing Fiona has a higher perception than I do. Yes, but they aren't on the men guarding the bridge. Those men appeared to bear some oddly patterned uniforms. If I had to guess from their identical uniforms, I would say, soldiers. Great, sounds like the National Guard. We should be safe enough, I said, getting ready to go before Fiona grabbed my arm. I gave her a withering glare and she quickly let go. If I go down there, the Black Dragon will see my slave collar and activate it. I curse internally, forgetting about her damn collar. Well, shit. Do you know how to remove it? I overheard the only way to remove it was death. I thought there had to be another way to remove these damnable slave collars, but we were short on time and resources. Gotta say, that's not ideal, I replied, mulling over the problem. Oh, I know, I have a few of the collars. I can test some runes on to see if those will help with removing the device. Fiona just shrugged. It wasn't like she really had a choice in the matter. So, I got to work testing out a few combinations of runes on the magical collars. I had 6 of the devices to test on. The first one exploded and I had to heal us both. It wasn't much of a surprise to her, as I had expected. Apparently, she saw me sneakily healing myself when she trained me at the barracks. At the time she wasn't sure it was healing, but I had confirmed it when she was injured a day or so ago in one of our monster fights. If it wasn't for the broken leg she received, I might have just left her to heal on her own. It was fine. Just like my second chance spell, she was bound to find out sooner or later. After that we moved to another house just to be safe, as I tested more runic combinations, hoping to find some combination that caused the device to unlock, or drained the magical energy from them to hopefully stop them from exploding when opened. I even tried one that would liquefy the metal when I activated it with a word. Note to self: liquid metal shrapnel fucking hurts. Then I decided to combine all of the runes, which was nerve-wracking. I had my head bent over and my little pocket knife scratching in dozens of tiny runes on a deceptively thin metal ring that held enough magical power to kill a human. But there it was, a finished prototype. The thing fairly vibrated in my hand with the power of its innate magic and my runic enhancements clashing together. I set it on a sewing mannequin we found in the house. Stepping back, I activated the rune using the keyword as I ducked around the door frame. The room glowed brightly for a split second and then I heard hissing. I waited a few seconds before sticking my head back into the room. "Oh, shit," I exclaimed as I ran in to put out the fire. The runes had worked. The ring had consumed itself with the stored power, causing it to turn liquid and melt off. It did, however, cause a significant amount of damage to the mannequin. Fiona picked that time to come to see what the ruckus was about. She took one look at the remains of the mannequin and said, "No, no, no, please find another way." "Well, I have an idea for another way." She looked at me hopefully. "Oh, and what might that be?" "Well, I could kill you." She turned to leave, throwing her arms up, "So my choices are possibly killing me or successfully killing me." I followed her out. "Well, you did say that death would remove it, I just figured the possibility of not death would be a better option." She stopped and turned to face me. "I don't know why I am even considering this idea, it's madness." "Well, they say genius and madness are only separated by success and failure." "Nobody says that," she replied tartly. "I'm pretty sure someone said that or something similar, plus there are no other options." "Fine," she said in resignation. "After I inscribe the runes I will cast second chance on you, just in case," I added as she looked at me pleadingly. "Then, I will cast rejuvenate, which should help with any damage you take." To be honest, I am not sure the other method would work anyway, as my second chance skill specifically states that no active effects are lost upon death. "Fates be damned, fine, let's get this madness over with," she said, plopping down in a kitchen chair. "Okay, I need you to hold completely still while I carve the runes." "Here, hold on to this, you will need it," I said, handing her a roll of leather. She looked at me, not knowing what it was for. I cleared my throat. "For the pain, put it between your teeth when I finish the runes. I don't know how long they will hold stable." She gave me a look of shock and tried to stand, but I pushed her back down in the seat. "Do you want the collar off or not?" She didn't say anything or not, she just sat there and I took that as confirmation to begin. There is something to be said about carving on a surface that you can manipulate in any direction you need versus trying to do the same on an object you can only rotate in one direction. After less than a minute I had her lay down on the couch and I kneeled to the side to get a better angle for carving. I needed to pick up a jeweler's loupe or magnifying glasses for more detailed work like this. It may not have been the most dignified position for her, but it made my work so much easier. She was only wearing her loose blouse and pants so as not to ruin her armor when the spell went off. I noticed she was wearing perfume. I figured she must have found it in this house or the last one. It smelled good. The carving went a bit faster than my first attempt, as I now knew the combination of runes to use. When I was finished I could immediately see the power starting to build and I rushed her into the bathroom knowing I had about a minute from my previous attempts. "Bend over the tub so the metal runs off you faster." "No, please, there has got to be a better way," she said, hesitating. I ended up having to force her to bend over the tub. "It's too late to change your mind, this thing is going to come apart in less than 30 seconds whether I want it to or not." She remained bent over the tub, shaking, but at least she remained there. "When you are ready I will cast my spell and activate the rune." I squeezed her hand, cast second chance on her, and moved to the edge of the room. I could have cast the spell sooner, but I didn't want her to chicken out even though she had almost done so already. Ready," she managed to get out, her voice firming with resolve. I cast rejuvenate and immediately activated the rune. I could tell she had shoved the leather between her teeth as her screams were muffled. "Fiona has died, second chance activated." The group message spurred me back into the room and I cast healing touch on her as she lay against the tub shuddering from pain. I brushed off any remaining molten metal bits with a towel, continuing to heal her as I did. Who would invent such a horrible device, I thought as I got on the ground and cradled the sobbing woman. I had indeed been harsh with her, but she didn't need me to coddle her and I still hadn't forgiven her for the attack. It didn't mean I couldn't comfort someone in their time of need. The shitty part about this whole thing was that I got experience from her death as well as a title that I don't believe I deserved. Congratulations, you have earned the title Team Killer. You revel in the deaths of your teammates, 10% bonus damage to allies, and party members. This title can only be wiped away by killing an equal or greater leveled enemy. I sighed, nothing I could do about it now. The only thing that mattered was that it worked. I double-checked to make sure the oath she gave me still showed up. It was there. I felt more faith in the oath now that the collar was off. Fiona awoke an undetermined time later. The pain had faded and she didn't know where she was. It took her a few seconds to realize she was still in the bathroom being held by Paul. Her first instinct was to leap up and slap him for being so presumptuous, but quickly remembered her life bond. She checked the notifications she had received. You have been freed from a slave collar, full control of your status has been returned. Congratulations, you have earned the title Till Death and Beyond. While fighting in a party with Paul Fuller, you receive a 25% bonus to all of your attributes. Even death cannot part you. She didn't quite know how to feel about the second notice. The next morning Fiona and I set off to the bridge. She had a cloak covering her armor, one that we had found in a home. This wasn't some fancy cloak of the rich or nobility, nope, this was a rain poncho in all its vinyl glory. She complained non-stop about the sound it made and how hot and sweaty she was. I just chuckled. She only had herself to blame. I had suggested she keep her armor off as we entered the town, but she shot down that suggestion, so the only other option was to cover it up. We approached the bridge from a side street, avoiding as many people as possible, especially the Black Dragon members we saw walking about. What unnerved me about these members was the fact that they didn't sport guns, which meant they were likely of a higher level, better class, and had more abilities. We ended up close enough to one that I got my identifiability off. Assassin level 12. The man stopped and looked around as if he had somehow sensed my spell, and I quickly walked away, Fiona in tow. Fiona, is it possible for people to detect the use of identify if used on them? I asked in a low tone, dropping back beside her. Anything is possible. Why, who did you scan? That last Black Dragon we saw, he came up as a level 12 assassin. Is that all the information you were able to glean? That's all my low-level spell lets me see. Why? That fact probably saved you from being directly linked to the spell. Please be careful of its use in the future. I just nodded. When I glanced back, the assassin had disappeared. Well, shit. The bridge came into view a few minutes later and we got in line to cross. I didn't realize it was this busy the night before. I could easily see a dozen soldiers decked out in full battle gear. There were 250 calories machine guns set up on small podiums surrounded by sandbags on the far end of the bridge. Each of these was manned by 2 soldiers that eyed everyone warily. There was also a man towards the back that seemed to exude an air of authority. It felt a lot like the commanders had. As the line in front of us filtered through the checkpoint, a soldier looked us over. No fighting within city limits. If we catch you, you will be arrested or killed. No warnings. Then the man moved on, repeating his message to anyone that looked like they could cause trouble. We were waved through a minute later and I stopped to ask the soldier a question. Do you know where the bazaar is? Go down 3 blocks and ask for Gertrude at the market, maybe she knows. Next, he yelled, dismissing me. Well, you up for sticking around with me a bit longer? I asked, expecting Fiona to be happy to be rid of me finally. You do realize I am with you, for life, right? Yeah, I was afraid she was going to say that. I had kind of hoped this life bond could be cancelled when my mission had completed. It was sounding like that was not an option. I could just leave her here, but something told me she would be able to track me down. I just shrugged and moved towards the location the soldier pointed out. It took us less time to walk the 3 blocks than it did to locate Gertrude in the parking lot, converted into an open-air market where all kinds of goods were for sale. Along with those goods came many different species, that I had yet to encounter. I saw what I assumed were dwarves, elves, gnomes, and all manner of beastkin. There was even another dragonkin, only this one looked like polished bronze. Every merchant we asked either ignored us when they realized we weren't buying or pointed in a random direction. Eventually, we found a human woman that was helpful and she led the way for a credit. Are you Gertrude? I asked an older lady, that looked like aged leather. She certainly didn't carry herself like an older lady. I am. What can I do for you, youngster? I was told that you knew where the bazaar was located. Not really a secret, anyone here could have told you. Who sent you to me? I shrugged. Some soldier guarding the bridge. That useless boy, wait till I see him again, I will tan his hide. Never too old to be bent over and paddled. I cringed as she went on in detail about what she was going to do with what I assumed was her son or grandson. "Follow me," she said, finally finishing her diatribe. We followed the crone and I was forced to jog to keep up. Good God, how is this woman so sprightly? I decided to take the time to see what her class was. Gertrude Matron level 15. The system filling in her name automatically because I already knew it. I was surprised at her level, wondering how this old woman managed it. I was broken from my wondering as the woman turned, glaring at me. "Didn't anyone ever tell you it was rude to ogle people without their consent?" she snapped at me and I lowered my head in shame. I even received a debuff. "You are suffering the matron's shame, all stats reduced by 4 for 5 minutes. I nearly stumbled from the debuff's effects and Fiona hissed at me, "What did I tell you?" After that embarrassing moment I just hunched my shoulders and plodded along behind the women. It was a good thing Fiona didn't have a similar debuff. After several blocks of walking, we turned the corner, and almost smack dab in the center of downtown was a metallic cylinder about 50 feet around that rose 30 feet into the air. I could see people coming and going from the many entrances into the structure. "Well, here it is, think you can handle it from here?" Gertrude said snidely. "We will be fine, thank you again, Gertrude," Fiona replied sincerely. I watched the old lady walk off at a furious pace, still astounded that a woman of her advanced years could move that fast.